My wife confessed to cheating on me for 4 years because she was bored and left me for weeks. Now she wants me back. For 17 years, my wife, 39F, and I, 40M, had been wed. Our 3 girls are 11, 13, and 15. We have been together for around 23 years and were high school sweethearts. Although I don't know much, this is the only information I know. 3 days ago, my wife returned home from her job. On the 4th day, she had to go to work, but first she quickly packed an overnight bag and departed. Our oldest daughter was home when she left, so that's the only reason I know this. My wife was sobbing and upset that she was hardly able to speak when she tried to talk to her. She was on the verge of panic. None of our calls or texts are getting a response from her. I immediately called her parents, who eventually replied that my wife is safe with them and urged me to be understanding and patient. They only said that. I attempted to get in touch with her brother, sister, and a close colleague. Her brother claimed to know nothing, and her coworker claimed that 3 days prior, she had arrived at work in the morning but had left by midday. She only knew that. There hasn't been any communication with my wife or the children since. We're not hearing anything from anyone. I'm trying to get by without her here with my 3 daughters. All I can answer when the kids ask me what's going on or what happened with mom is that she's with grandma and grandpa and that we should be understanding and patient. I can't help but want to swiftly load up the kids and head over there without warning. Sitting here in limbo is terrible, and it's just 3 hours away. The children believe we got into a heated argument and are divorcing, but that couldn't be further from the reality. We never argue. The children are aware of this. I'm not sure what's happening, but could someone please explain it logically? I'm trying to handle everything without her, but my current mental condition has me thinking in circles. Your spouse would be the first person you would notify if someone died. My wife would be the first person I would turn to for assistance if it were me, though it's possible that some old trauma was triggered. We don't know anything, nothing makes sense. I sit here in limbo with the girls, unsure of what to do. Nobody is telling us anything, and none of us know anything. It makes me anxious, afraid, irate, etc. Almost every feeling imaginable in this circumstance. Is there anyone who can think of something reasonable? Why would you do this to your family? Update 1, I apologize. I don't know much about Reddit yet, not much to share. Because I'm not really sure how to do it, I don't know how to connect my previous post. I didn't sleep last night, it was a long night. I apologize for the brief update. I read every thread yesterday and into the night, but I don't plan on using the computer much today. Today, we finally read the responses. I'll just state my knowledge and stop there. I ended up calling the cops last night as my father-in-law didn't call. A wellness check was conducted, as many of you recommended. I won't go into the storm of problems that resulted from this, but my wife has been having an affair for at least 2 years, if not more. Everyone was right. The other man reportedly died that night after suffering a heart attack on Tuesday. It seems likely that my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law have been aware of it and have been filling in for her. My wife still hasn't been in touch with either the girls or me. For the time being, I'm attempting to hide this from them, but to be honest, I don't know what to do next. I only know that, and it's enough to almost spell my demise. I appreciate all of your assistance and guidance. That's all, but I'm not sure how to get over this news. Please offer up prayers for me and the 2 of us. Update 2. A couple people have suggested this sub to me. I recently joined and have been reading a lot of postings whenever I have free time, usually at night when the day's turmoil is over. Naturally, the brain then takes over, and I have these depressive episodes. After that, I experience intense rage and then both feelings at once. It's almost impossible to sleep. Then, like a zombie, I go about my day. All the acronyms are something I'm attempting to learn. I suppose Friday was my D-Day. I initially believed my wife's affair to have lasted 2 years, but it now appears highly probable that it lasted longer. She had known the man she cheated on with AP for some time. The disclosure came after he sadly died of a heart attack. With the assistance of my eldest daughter, I continue to conduct research. I'm not yet ready to post about a lot of topics. I honestly didn't intend to keep posting about my predicament, but so many people have given me so much support and guidance that it's practically therapeutic. Knowing that so many other individuals are going through this kind of pain is painful. I'm so sorry for that. Yesterday and today, I had meetings with 2 different attorneys to go over my alternatives. I also made several calls about treatment, but where I reside, wait periods are really lengthy. I'm making an effort to follow many of the advice given by others, such as abstaining from drinking, although I don't and never have. Taking care of myself, exercising, etc. For someone my age, I'd say I'm in excellent shape, but right now I struggle to find the motivation to work out. I recognize that a lot of you will want specifics, like who, what, when, and so on, but please know that I'm simply not yet ready to go into all of that. It feels like a new bomb goes off every day, and all I want is some guidance on one item so that I might be able to get some sleep. My wife, the mother of my 3 lovely girls and my best friend since high school, was everything to me. We shake hands in secret and share inside jokes. Everything is gone. Everything. It's simply gone. I get really depressed when I reflect back on all of our years together, including every milestone and every laugh. It is incapacitating. It seems like she didn't care about any of it, and now she won't be in my future. Naturally, the how could you question then surfaces, and I am seized with an insatiable rage. I pound the mattress and scream into my pillow till my arms hurt. The cycle is terrible. I only go to sleep because I'm so tired, and when I wake up the mind games start over. My girls, who have been attempting to care for me as if they were my parents, receive all of my energy. They aren't treated fairly. After learning about the affair, how did you all sleep? With just your thoughts, how did you cope with the emptiness and silence at night? Aside from my daughters, I've determined that sleep must be my top priority in all of this. I'm hoping you can help though, because I simply can't. Many thanks to all of you. Update 3. I apologize for my relative inexperience on Reddit. A little more than a week has passed since my D-Day, however I'm not sure how much of my circumstances I should reiterate or repeat. I've since discovered that my wife's affair lasted for more than 4 years. No precise time frame yet. It most likely began emotionally before becoming bodily. I'm also interested in how the epidemic and lockdowns affected this. I might or might not find out the answers. In any case, my in-laws unexpectedly came to visit their grandchildren yesterday. Since the start of this ordeal, Del EW has been staying in their house, which is utterly ridiculous. Naturally, they greeted the girls for a total of 15 minutes. I have 3 girls with my wife. They then requested a private conversation with me. As you can anticipate, the chat was lengthy. I don't want to go into detail about it in this piece. In any case, my wife wants to return home but is scared of the consequences of her behavior and is unable to confront her past. Her parents also conducted extensive research to find out if I intended to file for divorce. They put a lot of effort into persuading me to forgive my wife and keep the marriage together. They wanted my wife out of their home, but it was also obvious that they were extremely humiliated and ashamed. The conversation was quite polite and courteous. I acknowledged that I misled them by claiming that I was unsure of my future intentions since I intend to get a divorce. However, I fear that if I tell my wife, I will never get the truth. And I might never understand. However, if at all feasible, I would like her to sit in front of me and explain everything. I want her to look me in the eyes and tell me everything after we've been married for 17 years, been together since high school, had 3 children, made innumerable memories, and experienced everything together. Additionally, I want my children to understand that I offered her the chance to apologize, explain herself, and resolve the situation as responsible adults. I'm constantly trying to decide which course will be best for my children. I'm not sure, perhaps I'm not doing it correctly. I can't legally bar my wife from our house. The attorney was extremely explicit about that. Therefore, even if I really don't want this right now, I can't stop my wife from coming home. In fact, my girls and I have begun to establish a pleasant routine. I therefore made a demand that, in my opinion, would be impossible to fulfill for some time. If, when my wife sat down with me face to face, looked me in the eyes, and told me everything about her affair, from beginning to end, without hesitation or more lying, I told her she may come home. She would next need to meet with the girls, provide an apology face to face, and respond to their inquiries. It's only fair, I reasoned, since they already know. Once more, she is legally free to return home anytime she pleases and is not subject to any obligations. However, I might be able to take advantage of her fear of us. Is that incorrect? Here, I'm not attempting to be cunning or dishonest. I simply don't want to live together just yet. If I can postpone it, our state has a 90-day waiting period before a divorce may occur. In any case, she will inevitably return home. Life will continue despite this disaster, and ultimately we will both need to return to our jobs. I simply wish to extend it in order to plan and improve my emotional and mental well-being. My wife says she doesn't want a divorce, but she has been texting the females. She apologizes to them over and over again. The texts have been shown to me. She inquires about me every day, and the truth about what she has done to us is really getting to her, especially in the past few days. How can I handle this? Was my request stupid? My wife is probably going to return home sooner rather than later. Right now, I have faith in my future. This doesn't scare me because I know it will happen eventually. As we proceed, I simply want to choose what's best for my girls and subsequently for myself. I am grateful to everyone who has been providing support, guidance, and encouragement. Update 4. I apologize for the length, but I just need to get this out of the way. It will be a bit of an anticlimax. Despite the awful weekend, my wife returned home yesterday. As the week progressed, there was a fair lot of build-up to it. Normally, when she walked through the doorway, I would embrace and kiss her, but this time, there was just this incredibly awkward tension between us. Before she spoke, she really approached me and attempted to embrace me, but I turned her away. Unbelievable. As though nothing had occurred. Naturally, I begged her to tell me everything after she calmed down. She stated once more that she is not yet ready. The outcome was the same when we chatted on the phone earlier this week. She simply reiterated that she wasn't prepared for that when I maintained that the only requirement for her to return home was that she loved the family enough to justify her absence of over 3 weeks. I took a few long breaths and tried to gather myself, even though it took a lot to keep from screaming at her. I didn't succeed. I abruptly stated after the first of many lengthy pauses that she had been having an affair with a coworker for more than 4 years, that she had planned to leave me for another man, that she had ghosted her entire family, and that she now enters the room without meeting the one requirement I had requested, and that I wanted a divorce. I suppose this is where the strangeness began. It was clear from her facial expression and body language that she was unaware of my level of knowledge regarding her affair. She gave me a wide-eyed look before simply standing in the kitchen and gazing at the floor. She remained silent and stern. This is not what I was anticipating at all. Perhaps an emotional outburst, a tearful confession, or even her cursing and screaming at me, accusing me of having the affair. Not this response, but rather a somber, "Okay, let's sit down and talk this out." To be honest, we must have stood in complete quiet for 5 minutes in the kitchen. It was simply the most peculiar thing I had ever encountered. Both she and I were obviously at a loss for words. I had read all of your remarks and suggestions regarding my predicament. I even made notes. I had prepared myself for every eventuality this conversation could bring, with the exception of this one, while I sat in front of a mirror. I ultimately made the decision to document what I knew about her affair at that precise moment. I may have been foolish, but I told her what I knew, albeit with some assumptions about how she met AP, her sister's participation, what transpired during COVID, etc. All she could do was look at the floor. She didn't say anything, so I became more and more irate, but I did everything in my power to avoid becoming profane or raising my voice. At last, I calmed down. Another long uneasy pause followed. Sadness replaced anger when everything became clear. Then I gently questioned her about what I had done to make her leave. Was I ever loved by her? Was he a P worth it too? She remained silent. Didn't move. Remained motionless, nothing at all from her. No sobs, no regrets, no shouting, no justification. She simply stood with her head down, nothing. This was painful. Perhaps this was more painful than D-Day. Not sure whether I would have moved, I just stood there looking at her. Then, of course, things got worse. The whole interaction was being overheard by our girls. I'm just so damned foolish. Over the past few weeks, I've been putting a lot of effort into attending to their needs and putting them first, but after I confronted my wife, I became emotional and stopped caring about where they were. Our oldest daughter, who had a lot of pent-up rage, stormed downstairs and screamed. My wife hurried to the bedroom and locked the door. We are currently at that point. Before I went to sleep last night, I could hear my wife sobbing for the majority of the night. Only our youngest has attempted to communicate with her. The others have stayed away from her. I'm going to propose that she remain with her sister until we can complete the divorce, if I can muster the confidence to do so. However, she still calls this place home. If we all have to live with her, it will only be a sad situation. You were all right about my wife, and I was incorrect. I was mistaken about every year we spent together, every memory, and every moment that changed our lives. I thought she would fall to her knees and ask for forgiveness. I really believed that she would confess the truth and repent for everything that had happened over the previous 4 years, thus clearing her of any blame. We are not worth it to this woman, who once drove back to a farmer's market after realizing she had been handed $10 more in change than she was supposed to. She doesn't value me, perhaps I never was. What comes next? It was really unpleasant at home today. The daughters and I made an effort to continue as we had for the previous 2 weeks, but it is obviously not feasible. All I want to do is move on from this whole situation, from the divorce to the uncomfortable conversations to the anticipated battles, arguments, and drama. How did you handle having to live with your WS, especially if you have children? I am aware that this is only the start. I keep reading blogs that say things will get better, but I'm a long way from that. Right now, I can't stop wanting to yell at every opportunity. Naturally, I'm making every effort to keep the girls' minds calm, but I'm not sure whether I can sustain it for 3 months. Before all of this is finished, school will begin. This is my life now, I suppose. I appreciate everyone's strong interest in me. I'm not sure if the worst is over or not, but I would appreciate any help you can give me to get through this next stage. Update 5. Since my WW returned home and I found out about her affair, I've been in a horrible mood. For my daughters, I've been doing my best to pretend. I make an effort to think and speak appropriately, but tonight I must face the reality. It comes in waves, as many of you post every day, but tonight I was struck by a very large one and became somewhat agitated. My WW has yet to get a lawyer despite the divorce being filed. And once more, I'm attempting to be as gentle and patient as I can in this situation because I'm beginning to see the possibility of an uncontested divorce that we primarily manage ourselves. But I'm not sure after tonight. We've been living together throughout the week, and because WW works so near to our family home, she spends Friday evenings at her sister's and Sunday nights at home. However, if there is no traffic, her sister is an hour away. It's been a habit of basically avoidance over the past few weeks, with WW essentially keeping to herself and the girls and I trying to go about our daily lives regularly. Even though we have informal conversations every evening, my oldest daughter and my WW have stopped talking after a few heated arguments. Right now, it's for the best. I've been following a lot of your advice lately, in addition to what I've read. I put a lot of effort into maintaining my self-control around my wife, and even though it requires all of my strength and willpower, I've been brief and uninterested in our small conversations, although always being courteous and respectful. The past 2 Fridays, up until now, she has arrived home from work, gathered a few things, and left for her sister's for the weekend before I have even returned from work. Not tonight though. When I got home, she was waiting for me in the kitchen. I attempted to ignore her tonight, but she gently took my hand and asked if I was going to treat her this way because she wasn't ready to discuss her affair with me. By the way, since everything went viral about a month ago, this is the first time she has ever spoken about her infidelity. I made an effort. I swear to you, I tried to just walk away and bite my tongue, but I became angry because our daughters weren't home at the time. I then released all of my vices, hurts, aches, anger, and miseries. I let her handle everything. I went on for so long I can't even remember. I completely forgot what time was. I did become a little animated and loud at times, and I did raise my voice. I simply broke down and told her how devastated I am, how much pain I endure every day, and everything that has been haunting me and that I have been holding back. I mean, if I tried to summarize what I said, this piece would be 4,000 words long. I had no intention of stopping once I got rolling. Naturally, I broke down and became tearful once more. After this, I was furious with myself. Damn it, I've been doing great. She reached me. I allowed her to affect me. I was aware that it would occur. I was aware. Horrible. I can only express so much in the waiting room, and it has been building for a while. Additionally, WW genuinely broke down and became emotional for the first time. She started crying furiously, which surprised me. Unfortunately, seeing that she was experiencing the same pain as I was made me pleased. I wish I didn't care, but it felt good to watch her finally cry since it showed that there was someone with some empathy inside of her. Surprisingly, she apologized several times as I was exploding. She would only mutter, "I'm so sorry," while sobbing in an awful way. Eventually, though, I left the kitchen before she could gather herself enough to say anything more. I begged her to stop bothering me. That's what occurred. She spent some time in the kitchen before heading back to her sister's house. After a half hour, the girls realized something had happened when they got home. Although it's difficult to conceal, I wasn't prepared to discuss anything and don't believe they should be aware of this. Do they? I don't want to stop the 2 youngest from making development because they have been doing a lot better. I also don't want to add fuel to my oldest's fury by telling her about this. I detest this so much. I detest it. I ought to have remained composed. I should have simply ignored my WW and walked straight by her. Right now, I'm not sure. Looking back, it seems like she was merely attempting to bring up her affair but was unsure of how to do so. Obviously, she didn't go very far because I blew out. I am now genuinely concerned for her. I don't want her to suffer any harm, but I am aware that many of you will be critical of me for this. With almost everyone ignoring her, she has been alone with her thoughts and secluded. Although it's true that she deserves it, she is still a person and the mother of my children. What a blow to me. I'm really disappointed in myself. I apologize for the lengthy tirade. I also yelled at my brother over the phone. I'll try to start over on Monday, man. I'm only a human. I must admit that it felt wonderful to vent to her, but now I'm feeling regret. Is it better to text my wife or to ignore her? I'm a complete wreck. However, I appreciate you listening, providing me with the help I need to get through this, and giving me all of your suggestions. We have all begun treatment, so that's something in the middle of the turmoil. But this is really, really difficult, just really difficult. Update 6. Thank you for your concern. I am aware that many of you have contacted me. The majority of you were right. Things aren't going well, and I haven't had any opportunity to access the internet. I was hoping to take a vacation from the internet, but I've been regressing a lot this week. It has simply been terrible. My wife has been really kind and has been apologizing for her affair, crying, smothering me, and knocking on my door at night to talk. She hasn't really left me alone this week. I've spoken to her when I felt like it, but I've also mostly ignored her. On Wednesday night, I finally lost my temper with her and told her to stop bothering me. Then it occurred last night. After her affair blew up, my soon-to-be ex-wife returned home a little more than a month ago. Now that we've started this awkward cohabitation routine, she came into my room after the daughters had gone to bed and begged to speak with me alone. In contrast to how she had been approaching me all week, I fed her first, but in order to avoid making the same mistake twice in front of the kids, we finally went to the garage and sat in my car. I apologize for the lengthy apology. She filled me in on everything. We spent about 3 hours out there, she said. I'm not sure how much to divulge. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up all night listening to her cry again. I also shed tears. I would then become so enraged that I would have to force myself not to walk in and yell at her. Then sob, then rage, and so forth. I apologize if I don't reply to anyone for a day or so, but I need to get this off my chest before I try to sleep. Having my WW apologize and ask for another chance all the time hasn't helped. I had to leave for a few hours tonight as well in order to avoid her. Simply put, being around her hurt so much. In any case, her sister introduced her to her AP approximately 5 years prior to COVID, seemingly with no romantic ambitions. However, he was a higher up at the company she presently works for and wanted to work for. She was able to convince him that her affair was not the reason behind her wish to change careers. However, it goes without saying that she had more motivation after changing employment. The AP started flirting with her once she was hired. Texting at first, followed by images, and then more texting. Then, right before COVID struck, things got physical. She wanted to tell me right away after confessing to her sister, but she chose to keep it to herself. Naturally, my wife claimed that she went NC with her AP shortly after, but he contacted her again as soon as the limitations and lockdowns were relaxed, and she continued to speak with him until the physical aspect of the affair resurfaced. She claimed to have halted the affair a few times out of remorse once businesses resumed operations, but she continued returning to him, thus it never ended. In essence, she provided a great deal of information. She recited the full 5-page packet of handwritten notes detailing her affair history, responding to questions as she went. She made false claims about weekend getaways with the girls, work-related travel, traffic bottlenecks, problems with her parents, shopping excursions, etc. The list was long, as I had expected. She told me so many falsehoods that I simply believed everything she said without question. They were merely a front to be with him though. It only made me feel worse to hear it all. Everyone was right. Her love, however, never truly wavered. She never became aloof during all of this, unlike what I frequently read. Although intimacy did shift, it wasn't enough for me to raise concerns. In any case, she acknowledges that she fell in love with AP and desired a life with him. He promised her luxury items, trips, and everything he could do for her. He was older, divorced, and unmarried. She claimed that the excitement of being with him was too great to resist and began to fantasize about fleeing her duties with the family. She remarked about how the everyday routines of family life bored her. She appeared to be honest, quite emotional, and extremely open. Halfway through, I started crying and lost my temper. As you can think, hearing it all hurt. Naturally, once she finished her confession, she told me how much she loved me and always would, and that she would stop at nothing to try to keep the marriage intact. Many of you anticipated this, yet it all seems so phony to me, as if it had been practiced. Having spent more than half of my life with this woman, I can detect when she is acting shady. I think it doesn't matter if I'm mistaken, but I was more composed than I was the week before. Nevertheless, I became irate and said a few hurtful things, such as making fun of her AP for having several girlfriends, of whom she was only one that he was prepared to discard. She appeared pretty offended about that. When I think about this moment, when she would finally reveal all the one-liners I might say to her or things I could say to hurt her back, a million thoughts crossed my mind. I couldn't think of hundreds of answers during the emotional moment the other night, but I knew I would ask. If AP were still alive and she had to choose between me and him, who would she pick? She hesitated and then whispered, "That's not fair." I pressed the subject, and then she eventually stated she'd, of course, select me. In reaction, I said that she was lying again, which was why I was divorcing her. The last thing she said was that she began to cry. We spent some time in the automobile. She continued to cry, but I was exhausted, so I simply informed her that we were divorcing and that we owed it to the kids to be there in their lives, to be good parents, and to get along amicably. In addition, I said that I hoped she was a decent enough person to end our divorce amicably and fairly after all the suffering she had caused me. That would demonstrate her true affection for me. Please realize that I'm not a petty person and that I didn't intentionally mean to hurt her when I told her that I had stolen anything from another website. It just seemed like the right way to wrap things up. However, I truly meant what I said and did. After telling her that I would have loved her forever and leaning over to kiss her on the forehead, I got out of the car and went to bed. That was it. Naturally, I didn't get much sleep the night before, and now I'm having trouble falling asleep tonight. I have no idea what will happen next. One positive, I suppose, is that she no longer has the chance to challenge the divorce. However, I have yet to speak with my attorney. I'm crying once more and reverting to my angry and depressed states. Hearing everything last night was really difficult, even though I could have avoided it all. She may have lied and made it up too, now that I know. Who knows? However, it appeared to go well with everything I had assembled during the previous month. For the time being, that's it. It seems like this never ends. I feel strong again after a few good days, and then something else happens. Even though it's only been days, it feels like months have passed. However, I will attempt to get some rest. Imagine that the one lady you have ever loved and kissed, the love of your life, informs you that she cheated on you for more than 4 years because she was bored. Had no relationship problems, no dead bedroom, no falling out of love, no growing apart, nothing of the sort. Merely due to her boredom. I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse. Thank you for reading and for your assistance. It was a rough couple of nights. Horrible. My husband refused to take me to the hospital during labor, choosing lunch with his family instead. What should I do? I'm Selena, 30F, a new mother to Eddie M, who is only a few days old. I wish I could say that my family is happy right now, but they aren't. Everyone around me is pointing the finger at me because I am now going through a divorce. I understand that being a single mother is difficult, but I would stop at nothing to rescue my son from the poisonous atmosphere he would have been in had I not left that marriage. I need some frank feedback because I've made some terrible blunders. Since high school, Robert and I have been dating, and he has been kind to me. He planned dates, got me flowers, took me to get my nails done, and did all the other romantic things that girls like. His mother and sister were the only things he valued more than me, and I never objected to that. I suppose I interpreted it as a positive sign. I actually thought, oh well, he treats the women in his life so well, he is a real gentleman. If I ever get to marry him and become his wife, he will probably treat me even better. I can't even begin to explain how mistaken I was. The hunt ended the moment I married him. The taken for granted phase was the next stage. You don't realize emotional abuse all at once. You realize it over time. When you truly love that man, it's also quite hard to leave something like that. Now that I think about it, I should have recognized that Robert was incapable of setting limits or setting priorities, but love blinds you. Both my mother-in-law, Mill, and sister-in-law, Sil, wore long trains of white and were maid of honor at my wedding. Robert stated it didn't really matter and that I was ruining our special day by being sulky when I brought up the fact that the bridesmaids and maid of honor were expected to wear pink. I should just concentrate on something else instead. But that was not all. They were in every photo, even interfering with the couple's candid shots. My husband said, "The kiddo is just having fun, let her be," in response to the photographer's request that my Sil stop since he was becoming tired. With her in the frame, I'm confident the photos would look better. My Sil is not a child. Next year, she will tie the knot at the age of 25. That day, I felt so ashamed that I came to the realization that I had been mistaken about Robert all along. I was already Robert's wife, though, so it was too late. The one bright spot was that we were able to move in after our wedding because my cousin and his wife had given us a house as a wedding present. Although we didn't spend much time with my in-laws, Robert never stayed at home with me and instead visited them every weekend. He said that we would go on the vacation after his sister was married so that his sister and prospective brother-in-law could accompany us when I pointed out that we didn't even go on a honeymoon trip. It's important to note in this regard that his sister was unemployed and his future brother-in-law was a freeloader. She laughed it off when I tried to explain that marriage entails a lot of financial responsibility and that her brother would handle all of her financial obligations. I didn't bring up the topic again since I knew there wasn't much I could do about it without Robert's assistance, which he didn't provide. Yes, the warning signs were begging to be noticed, but I believed I could save our marriage. I have no idea why I chose to play Bob the Builder, but there I was, attempting to gain his favor by gaining the favor of his family. I chose to accompany Robert after realizing that he would not spend a single weekend with me. His mother and sister were not happy to see him the one and only time I visited. Even more unexpected was the presence of my sister-in-law, Sarah, 26F, and her freeloading fiancé, Dylan, 26M. In essence, I was the only one who was never invited to participate. I explained that I had come to surprise them and that I had brought a cake with me. As though Sarah had told the greatest joke in the world, they all chuckled when my sister-in-law added, "A nasty surprise, I see." Beatrice, 56F, Robert's mother, stated that they didn't have enough food for me because they didn't expect strangers because this was family time. Since I was his wife, I expected Robert to remark something about how much more of a part of the family I am than Dylan, but instead he was staring out the window and was totally absorbed in his thoughts, or at least acting that way. Robert gave me the car keys stoically after I informed him I would drive home. His mother waved goodbye with a smile and advised me not to act like a jealous child and bother Robert in that way. I cried all the way home and left without saying anything because I was so embarrassed. The following day, Robert took me out to dinner at my favorite continental restaurant after returning home that day with flowers and chocolates. Therefore, he was aware of the abhorrent treatment, he simply decided not to confront it. Robert treated me like a queen for the entire week that followed, until the following weekend, at which point he left for his contented family. Until the following weekend, he would return and overcompensate. After a few months of marriage, this occurred, and even the preferential treatment ceased. Dismissal took its place. He would blame me of not understanding his responsibilities to his family and say that I should be accustomed to his Saturday breakfast with his family by now if I ever mentioned how lonely I felt on the weekends and wanted to spend time with him. He frequently accused me of exaggerating. I told my mother about my extreme dissatisfaction. According to Mom, if we had a child, Robert might be more involved and at home and I might not feel as alone. I reprimanded her and told her that having a child would be a very selfish motive, but she managed to get the notion into my head, and I continued to consider it. I might have to drop the child off at my mom's before I left for work because we would both be working parents, but on the weekends, I would be able to spend a lot of time with the child. Wouldn't the baby's father want the same thing? I asked my husband whether he thought we were ready to become parents as I gradually developed a kind of baby fever. He was ecstatic and said that his mother had even hinted at this. He shrugged and stated that his mother was growing old and ready to be a grandma when I asked him why she wanted us to have a child. Therefore, it would be beneficial to have a young man who could look after her. I informed him that I didn't believe he was ready to be a father and that he couldn't use our child to care for his mother. The baby conversation was out of the question after our argument. I'm not sure what changed, but all of a sudden Robert began spending his weekends at home. He resumed his pre-marriage treatment of me, even purchasing tickets to the Maldives for our much-postponed honeymoon. During our week-long honeymoon in the Maldives, Robert made me feel incredibly unique and adored. He claimed he wanted to make amends for hurting my feelings. I fell straight into his trap, foolish as I was. We found out I was pregnant after returning from our vacation. It delighted Robert. Robert persuaded me that we were prepared to become parents, despite my reservations. During the first 3 months of my pregnancy, he took exceptional care of me, taking me to the doctor, making sure I took my vitamins, staying at home on the weekends, ordering all the food I wanted, and shopping for our unborn child. Things returned to their pre-vacation state in the 4th month. He had gotten me pregnant and ensured that I would do all in my power to avoid having the baby. That was the act's entire purpose. I was really depressed in the weeks before my labor. My mom came over to look after me, but she always blamed Robert's actions on his wealth, which was all that mattered to her. The 3rd week of December was my due date. Mom attended her brother's funeral 2 weeks prior to my birth. I was unable to attend my uncle's funeral because the due date was so near. I pleaded with my hubby to spend the weekend at home. My uncle's passing made me sad and lonely. I didn't want to be at home by myself on that particular day. I stated this to my husband and he responded, "Sel, you are going to be a mother and make a lot of sacrifices in the future, So being alone for a day is nothing compared to the sacrifices that you have to make. I will suggest that you better sleep it off. I will see you tonight. Don't wait up for me. I will have dinner with them. Bye, honey, take care. Remember you have to take care of yourself for our little Eddie. He took the car keys and drove off without even waiting for my answer. That particular day, I was feeling very ill, so I went to lie down and dozed off for almost an hour. I woke up with excruciating cramping. I was horrified to discover that my water had burst when I noticed that the bed was damp. I contacted my spouse right away. Before answering, he hung up the phone twice. His voice was absolutely irritated. When I heard my water break, I actually screamed. He said, "So why are you wasting time calling me? Call the hospital or something." I don't know, man. Gosh, you are a grown woman. Pull yourself together and face the situation. I am literally between brunch with everybody. Even Dylan's parents are here. Stop calling me. The line died. After staring at the phone I was holding, I went outside onto the street. I couldn't even drive myself to the hospital since Robert had stolen the car. A man stopped when I flagged down a car. He held the door open for me in a hurry. I was taken to the hospital in a hurry. Mr. Singh, the gentleman, completed all the papers and asked if I wanted him to make a phone call. He came and informed me that no one was answering after I gave him my husband's phone. In that instant, a stranger named Mr. Singh stood up. Eddie was the only person who came to see me after I gave birth. He brought me chicken wings, bananas, and baby outfits. I started to cry. Since my uncle was unable to be present in person, I had the impression that his spirit had sent this man. Mr. Singh gave me a pat on the hand and congratulated me. He muttered a prayer for Eddie after I handed him over to him. I reminded him of his daughter, he said, and I should call him if I ever needed anything. I got his card from him. I noticed that he practiced divorce law. I believed that all of the signals were coming from my guardian angel. I told Mr. Singh without hesitation that I was looking for a place to stay. I desired a home of my own. He offered to transfer me into his penthouse, saying I wouldn't have to worry about the rent until I started working. He turned back before leaving, saying, "By the way, you can call me uncle." That evening, my hubby called in the interim. I didn't answer, but I did see it ring. I requested the nurses not to tell my husband that I was there in case he called since I didn't want him to know. They concurred. My spouse texted me to inquire which hospital I was at. I didn't respond. I was questioned by the nurses if they ought to contact social services. I requested that they refrain. The physicians and nurses were incredibly understanding and nice. My mother would undoubtedly tell Robert where I was, so I didn't even answer her phone. When Uncle Singh arrived the following day, he informed me that everything was prepared for my move-in. Since his daughter used to live there, he claimed there wasn't much to prepare anyhow. It was not long ago that she left the nation to work somewhere in Germany. He claimed that because he missed his daughter so much, it would be pleasant to have someone live in her apartment. His wife was equally excited to meet me, he informed me. I was driven to their tidy and lovely apartment by Uncle Singh. Auntie quickly began discussing ways to make things comfortable for me, even though she was overweight. I kept telling them that all I wanted was to stay there, but they kept asking if I wanted anything. After telling them all that had transpired, I requested that my uncle initiate the divorce process. I replied that I had never believed in anything more when he questioned whether I was certain about it. I was instructed by my uncle to text my spouse about the birth of my son. So I sent Robert an SMS about it. He informed me that I had been really irresponsible and that we needed to go meet his family right now with Eddie. He had the audacity to believe that I would take my son to meet his toxic family, I told him. After a period of silence, he continued. "Don't be a kid. We have to take Eddie to his godmother." When I questioned him who made the decision to name Robert's sister as the godmother, he told me to stop being funny since that was how it was always meant to be. I lost my composure and began to scream, "You know what's ridiculous? It's you. You are the damn joker. I had to take a lift to the damn hospital and give birth alone. If you loved me and your son, you would have rushed to us. You are so damn selfish, and your family is crazy. You are not going to be a part of my son's life. You will hear from my lawyer soon. I am divorcing you." When I hung up, I was furious. Auntie seemed somewhat worried. She said that my spouse was a child and not a man when I hung up. For the first time in a long time, I laughed. When my mother called, she went on and on about how awful I was and how Robert had called to let her know what had happened. She informed me that because I had taken my son away from them, their family was pursuing charges. It seems that I am a self-centered mother who only cares about herself, so I should be hauled to court and have my son taken away from me. They claimed that I was unfit to be a mother because of my depression. I informed my mother that I didn't care about their opinions since I was confident I would win the case and be granted sole custody of my son. I ended the call and made the decision not to answer any more calls from my relatives. In order to augment my income, I began applying for freelance jobs. Even though I had a job already, I needed more if I wanted to provide for my son comfortably. My phone began buzzing nonstop with texts all of a sudden. Dylan's entire family and my in-laws were sending me hateful texts. They were calling me a villain in derogatory terms since I had destroyed their family. The only thing that is saving you right now is the fact that you don't know your address. Otherwise, we would totally come over and teach you a lesson, you stupid cuss words, they said, threatening to break into my house and take my son by force. Auntie grabbed the phone out of my hand as I was shivering from reading these texts and said, "You're going to eat and get some rest. I will look after Eddie till you wake up. You are not going to check your phone and not stress. Your uncle will take care of everything. When you wake up, your uncle will take you to the police station to lodge a complaint. We need to file a restraining order." I really wanted to vent, and I figured that putting it in writing would help me gather my thoughts. This was written in the bathtub during a lengthy soak. I'm going to bed shortly. The question of whether I made the right decision in preventing Robert from meeting Eddie, however, has been the one that has been plaguing me the most. Will this have an impact on his child's brain? I'm not sure whether Robert's presence would have had a negative impact on him because I don't think he is a good role model in any way. Update 1. Despite my reluctance to acknowledge it, I have been reading your comments and you are correct. Both divorce and the loss of a parent will inevitably affect Eddie in some way. Simply said, I'm happy Uncle and Auntie Singh will show the baby the affection he needs. Yesterday, I spoke with Uncle's daughter. She works as a scientist. I was explaining the situation that led me to her apartment to her. She concluded by saying that God orchestrated the gathering. She was quite concerned about her parents, but for the first time in a long time, she saw her mother truly happy now that I was there. Don't worry about the rent yet, she said. To my astonishment, she returned my gratitude after I did. I feel so fortunate that I cannot express it to you all. Eddie will look up to Uncle Singh as a positive male role model. I've given it a lot of thought, and I believe I will be as honest as possible in my responses to Eddie's challenging questions. I'll make an effort to teach him how to be a man rather than a pet of his mother. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Update 2, let's get to the update. Uncle and I went to file the restraining order after I woke up from my nap. I can state with confidence that Eddie is in good hands because Auntie has been taking excellent care of him. Since the restraining order was filed, there's been a lot of calm, but I think I caught a glimpse of Dylan today as I headed to work. I'm not sure if this is just a hallucination or what. I'm not sure. I might have paranoia. I don't want to cause Uncle or Auntie any unnecessary anxiety, therefore I haven't told them about this. Technically, there is nothing preventing Dylan from attempting to get in touch with me because the restraining order has been filed against Robert's family. I don't want them to learn my residence. I'll keep you all informed. Update 3. Hello everyone, my penthouse was egged last night. I was by myself. Auntie and Uncle had gone home for the night. I rushed to Eddie's sleeping quarters and embraced him. He was sobbing uncontrollably and really frightened. I was secretly experiencing a panic attack because I felt so frightened and constrained. I attempted rocking Eddie back to sleep after the egging ceased after 15 long minutes since I was immobile. I placed Eddie on my bed and lay awake with him after he fell asleep. When Auntie arrived to meet me the following morning, she was in a complete panic. She wanted me to live with them in their home, but I informed her that it wouldn't make a difference because their house will be egged the next time. Although I believe my hypothesis that Dylan had followed me was correct, we are unable to bring a direct case against him because the law does not allow for speculation. We have accused unidentified individuals of vandalism. As I write this, Uncle is installing cameras and a new security system. Next week is when we have our court hearing. I'll keep you all informed. Update 4. I'm exhausted. This will only be a brief update. All I want is for the hearing to end. At this point, the drama is becoming excessive. Dylan attempted to break into the house last night. The security system alerted 911 right away, and he was apprehended. He had a black balaclava on. The police took him away. Upon questioning, it was discovered that they intended to abduct Eddie. Then, custody would go to Robert, and I might be seen as a negligent mother. However, the entire game was altered by the fact that he was captured. They have absolutely no chance of winning now, and more significantly, some of them will be going to jail. Update 5. The kidnapping was rejected by Robert's family. Yes, I'm not at all surprised. Dylan was completely enamored with Sarah, but she has since left him. My uncle told me that no one ever paid Dylan a visit while he was in detention. Uncle gave Robert a lot of attention throughout our court session today. It appears that things will work out for us. Robert rushed up to me and held my hand as I was leaving after the hearing. He wanted me to move back with him and our children after admitting his sins. I was on the verge of giving in, but then I recalled all the times I had done so, and everything had simply returned to normal. I asked him to do his foolish stunts on someone else after taking my hand away from his. I told him that he needed to mature and that it was unrealistic to expect a man who didn't act like an adult to raise a child. It is unheard of for a child to raise another child, is it not? The microphone drops. Before he could say anything further, I hopped into Uncle's car and drove off. I gave myself a mental fist pump in anticipation of this incredible return. LOL. How do you all feel about my return? Wish me luck at the upcoming hearing as well. Can you guess who received Eddie's custody and the majority of the child support? Selena, your girl, is the one. Robert was granted visiting rights, that's all. I'm not going to appeal since I don't think it will be pleasant to deny my child his father. I don't want Eddie to grow up and blame my egotistical drive to win for his dad's unfamiliar appearance, even though I am positive that we would win if I did. This is exactly what I told Robert, but I added a caveat. He must never take Eddie to see his sister and grandma. I won't think twice about removing his visiting privileges if I discover anything suspicious happening behind my back. In addition to my usual career, I have secured a highly lucrative freelance position. Additionally, I am establishing a blog for new single mothers, which is becoming very popular. I already have some sponsors. I invite you to see my blog as well. I can't express how thrilled I am to be a new mother. Right now, motherhood is going nicely for me. Being Eddie's mother makes me happy. In addition, my mother has returned. She finally believes that I made the correct decision in leaving that marriage after the abduction attempt. She thanked Uncle and Auntie excessively and apologized to me. She cried as she saw her grandchild for the first time. She cursed Dylan while cradling Eddie. She expressed her disbelief that someone would genuinely attempt to harm a child in such a terrible way. For a youngster, nothing hurts more than being taken away from its mother. I wholeheartedly concur. Dylan is still on trial. Uncle claims that he will undoubtedly go to jail given the evidence against him. Sarah, meantime, is already married to a wealthy elderly man she met at a party. It seems that after just 1 week of dating, they are getting married. A friend of mine who lives close to Robert's residence is providing me with updates on their family. All the tea is going to your daughter. LOL. Oh, and I had requested that Robert vacate our home. Come on, it was a present from my family, therefore it's only right that he moves out. This week, he moved out, therefore I'm going back to my former residence. I can't even begin to express how grateful I am to the Singh family. For 2 months, I remained with them at no cost. They refused to accept my attempt to pay them rent. They only collected a month's rent in the end, claiming that this was my uncle's fee for defending me and that they would not want any more money from me. Update 6. I apologize for not responding to you all sooner. God, being a mother is a full-time job. I know, it's been 6 months. I'm grateful for my mother and aunt. When I leave for work, they alternately watch Eddie. These 2 ladies have been a huge assistance. After returning home and enjoying some delicious and nourishing meals, I play with Eddie till he falls asleep. Every weekend, my uncle comes to visit us, and I also got to meet his daughter, who recently moved here from Germany. She is as kind as her parents, and she spent a week with us. I asked her to be my son's godmother just before she left for Germany. She sobbed uncontrollably and gave Eddie and me hugs. Eddie's godfather is my cousin, who gave the house as a gift. He wasn't shocked when I told him what had happened over the past 6 months. He claimed that he had reservations and constantly felt immature around Robert. He apologized for not being able to support me during that time because I was unable to contact him because he was out of the country. It wouldn't have helped even if I had succeeded in doing it. Eddie has experienced a lot of firsts in the last few months. After learning to roll over, he attempted to crawl. He spoke his first word as well. He really enjoys his Bumblebee soft toy, but my mom says it's simply a random sound he made. Every month, Robert continues to provide new items. It felt incredibly weird when he came to visit us last week. The fact that the man I loved so deeply is now a stranger also kind of hurts me. But that's life, I suppose. Even though bad things happen, one must remain optimistic. I let Robert play with Eddie by himself. It was a smart move because I could do a lot of work while Robert took care of the infant. Robert had put baby Eddie to sleep before I finished all of my job. He appeared incredibly small and frail as he lay on Robert's breast. Robert was partly sleeping, and the thought of what might have happened made me very sad. According to my therapist, it's normal to feel this way and not feel bad about being sad for Robert. After gathering myself, I took a photo of the father and son. I framed that photo and gave it to Robert as a birthday present. After giving it a thorough examination, he thanked me. Being a father has, in my opinion, caused him to undergo a major transformation. Mom sided with stepdad and his kids, kicked me out, but they forgot that I own the house. Now it's time to take it back. It never occurred to me, 35M, that my father's meticulous estate planning would ultimately cause our family to fall apart. There's a lot to digest here, and I want to make sure I'm giving you the whole picture, so let me start at the beginning. One of the big tech businesses in Seattle employs me as a senior software architect. My dad always had this kind of job in mind for me. Technology is the future, he would exclaim proudly after I was accepted to UW's computer science program. He had a profitable construction business and wasn't a techie, but he had a remarkable knack for predicting trends. Beginning with the recession of the late 1980s, Dad started his construction business from the ground up throughout some of the most difficult periods in the industry. He took on projects that other contractors wouldn't take on, using only a pickup truck and his tools. Back then, Mom told me, they lived in a small apartment and were frugal, but Dad had this unwavering faith in his vision. He would frequently remark, "The key is to build relationships, not just buildings." That way of thinking got him through his difficult early years. Dad's business was unique because of the way he treated both customers and staff. Even if it meant losing some bids to rivals who made exaggerated deadline promises, he was a firm believer in open pricing and truthful schedules. First, establish trust, he would advise. He was correct when he said, the profits will follow. His business, which was renowned for taking on intricate restoration projects requiring both technical expertise and historical sensitivity, rose to prominence in the Seattle area by the mid-1990s. Because of the devotion he had developed with his clients and staff, Dad's business survived the 2008 financial crisis, when many construction companies were failing. He didn't fire a single employee during that period. Rather, he reduced his personal income to zero and took out a second mortgage on his cherished Mustang. I learned more about leadership from watching him handle that issue than I could have from any management course. Your employees are your extended family, he told me. You take care of them, they'll take care of your business. I didn't realize at the time how much his managerial approach affected my own career. Many of his ideas were put to use when I was promoted to team lead at my software business. I established thorough documentation procedures for our code, much as he had kept thorough project logs for every building site. I was able to lead my development team through challenging project deadlines thanks to his attention on fostering good relationships. I met Emily, 34F, at a hackathon in my junior year. She assisted in planning the event while pursuing her studies in business administration. Despite my lack of sleep, energy drink addiction, and likely messy appearance, she somehow found my love of code charming. From the first time he laid eyes on her, Dad fell in love. He told me, she grounds you. Following their first meal together. Don't let this one get away. After college, Dad even assisted Emily in launching her own marketing firm. He introduced her to his network of local company owners, showed her how he drafted his contracts, and shared his business objectives with her. He would tell us, success isn't just about what you know. It's about helping others succeed too. Dad was always imparting his expertise and educating. Those formative years were unique. Emily and I would always make the drive to my parents' house on Sundays to have dinner. We would all sit on the back deck that Dad had constructed and chat about everything and nothing while he lit the grill. Even though he couldn't understand the majority of the technical details of my most recent work, he would still ask in-depth inquiries. Mom used to say, "There they go again with the computer talk," with a loving eye roll. Dad's pride and joy was the house itself. He purchased it with the proceeds from his first significant construction job in the 1990s, which was a historic restoration project that made his business famous. In one of Seattle's older neighborhoods, this lovely craftsman-style home features a wraparound porch and a garage that he transformed into the most well-organized workshop you've ever seen. Labeled and placed with almost fanatical precision, each tool has its place. Dad handled the house as though it were a living example of his skill. Every renovation was meticulously organized and recorded. Every repair, improvement and paint job was documented in a thorough spreadsheet that he maintained. A house is like a living thing, he would say as he demonstrated for me how to clean the gutters or inspect the foundation. He maintained a maintenance regimen that included everything from checking the roof after winter storms to changing air filters. Neglect the little things, and they become big problems. In addition to being his haven, the workshop served as a classroom where he taught me about subjects other than tools. In addition to adding unique storage options and a workbench he made especially for teaching me woodworking, he had completely renovated the garage himself. He would say, "Every piece of wood has its own story." As we were working, The pegboard wall with delineated shapes for each tool wasn't just about organization. It was his method of teaching me that everything has a place and a purpose. Our job is to help tell that story. Our family held weekends in high regard. In that garage, Dad and I would work on his 1967 Mustang for hours on end. When I was 12, Dad had purchased it for restoration, claiming it would be a project that would strengthen our bond as father and son. That vehicle turned into a life lessons classroom. His advice, which I still abide by now, was straightforward. Always use the right tool for the job. Or shortcuts look tempting, but they'll cost you in the long run. Although Dad might have completed the Mustang project in 1 year if he had so desired, it took 3 years. However, he was more interested in the process than the final destination. I learned everything from project management to fundamental mechanics from him. We took pictures of every component we changed, recorded each step, and maintained thorough logs of our development. This isn't just about fixing a car, he would affirm. It's about learning how to break down big problems into manageable pieces. I found that lesson to be really helpful in my profession as a software developer. Emily and I purchased a small home around 20 minutes from my parents' house after we were married. Although Dad insisted that we take out the mortgage in our names, Dad assisted us with the down payment. You need to build your own credit history, he clarified. It's about standing on your own feet. He taught me how to install ceiling fans and fix drywall as he worked on our renovations on the weekends. He was preparing me for the responsibilities of home ownership even back then. At this time, my career was really taking off. I'd just received a promotion to team lead, overseeing a team that was creating cloud infrastructure solutions. I enjoyed every second of it, even if the hours were long and the strain was great. During my lunch breaks, Dad would frequently call to check in, without discussing anything specific. He was aware of the demands of managing a group and overseeing the work of others. Remember to delegate, he would say. You can't do everything yourself, just like I can't build a house alone. When Dad initially stated feeling exhausted all the time, we were discussing the possibility of starting a family. He continued to put off seeing a doctor, despite Mom's insistence. Just working too hard, he would dismiss our worries. He was working on his largest project to date, a multi-million-dollar development deal that would have established his business for the ensuing 10 years. In retrospect, I regret not pressing harder and insisting on those examinations sooner. Perhaps things might have turned out differently. At the time, the business was expanding quickly. Dad was discussing growing into historical restoration projects in the Pacific Northwest and had recently launched a second office in Portland. He has established a reputation for updating the infrastructure of historic structures without sacrificing their character. He would tell his clients, it's about embracing the future while respecting the past. Everything he accomplished, including his personal and professional life, was impacted by his love of preservation. The Mustang was the subject of our last meaningful discussion. He was discussing taking it to car shows now that we had completed the restoration. When he remarked, we should sign up for the Pacific Northwest Classic, his eyes glowed like a child's. He continued to plan for the future until the very end, saying, show these youngsters what a real muscle car looks like. It began like any other morning until everything changed. When Mom called, my phone buzzed while I was in an early meeting. We were in the midst of an important project conversation, so I nearly didn't respond. But I had to go out and take it for some reason. Mom was crying so hard she was having trouble speaking. Dad had passed out on a construction site. He had left by the time I arrived at the hospital. According to the physicians, it was a sudden and severe heart attack. He was only 58. The weeks following Dad's passing were a haze of mourning and bureaucracy. The funeral was crowded. Dad's business and community involvement had impacted countless people. Suppliers, contractors, and even rival businesses came to show their support. Everybody shared a story about how Dad had supported them, given them advice, or simply been there for them when they needed someone to confide in. One old craftsman told me how, despite being unable to work during a protracted illness, Dad had managed to keep him on the payroll. Your father understood that business was about people first, he stated. The workers of the company were heartbroken. Many of them had known Dad for decades, and they told me things I had never heard before, like how he had paid for the college textbooks of one foreman's daughter, assisted another through a divorce, or remained late to teach apprentices the nuances of historical restoration. With pictures and handwritten remarks from both clients and employees, the workplace conference room was transformed into an unofficial monument. We were all surprised by how well Dad had prepared for everything. His attorney, Mr. Anderson, summoned us in for a meeting a week following the funeral. He took out this enormous accordion file that read Family Security Protocol and was neatly handwritten by Dad. Dozens of carefully arranged papers with comprehensive instructions for various areas of his land were found within. I was given a 3-day tour of Dad's estate paperwork by Mr. Anderson. Each color-coded container had personal notes outlining his decisions in addition to legal paperwork. "I've never seen an estate plan this thoroughly in my 35 years of practice," Mr. Anderson remarked. Dad had even included a 5-year business transition plan with backup plans for various circumstances. After that, Mom began going to her church's bereavement support group. She first met Steve, 58M, there. Initially, she only mentioned him in passing. Steve suggested this great book about healing. Or, Steve said it's normal to feel this way. He was one of the group facilitators and had lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. Even if it seemed a little early, I was happy that she was receiving support. I was reminded by Emily that everyone experiences grief in a unique way. Every Tuesday night, the church grief support group met. Before long, Mom was attending church functions with Steve more often. After services, coffee gatherings became lunch meetings, which in turn became dinner dates. Our family friends began to worry about how quickly their friendship was developing. At a family get-together, my Aunt Jane pulled me aside because she was concerned that Mom was hurrying into things to make up for Dad's absence. Mom's changes became more apparent. Her haircut changed, she started dressing differently, and she even threw out the garden that Dad had helped her create. Every time I questioned these changes, she would respond, "It's time for a fresh start." Dad was hardly ever mentioned by the woman who used to spend hours narrating her life with him. It went more quickly than any of us had anticipated. Mom announced that Steve was moving in 6 months after Dad's death. James, 30M, and Lisa, 32F, his own grown children, felt it would be beneficial to bring life back into the house. I made an effort to be sympathetic, but it seemed like she was in a rush to replace everything Dad had constructed. "I'm at a crossroads right now. How can I preserve Dad's legacy without jeopardizing Mom's chances for happiness? Emily advises me to strike a balance, but I can't help but think of Dad's letter. Son, preserve those memories. First update. I apologize for the wait for the update and appreciate all of the advice you gave on my previous article. 3 months have passed since my last post, and things have become much worse. Steve's domineering demeanor used to bother me, but now he acts as though he owns the house my dad left me. Steve made the decision to begin a significant restoration project last month without even asking my permission. The built-in bookshelves my dad had made for the living room were being torn up by contractors when I visited one weekend. As if he owned the building, Steve was watching over them and directing them to just throw all this old wood in the dumpster. These were the final project Dad and I worked on together before he became ill, so they were more than just shelves. He responded angrily when I approached him. He said, "Look, son," with a condescending emphasis on the pronoun. "This house needs to be brought into the 21st century. Your father's taste was, well, dated. We're doing you a favor by increasing the property value." I reminded him that any modifications required my consent legally. Mom obviously agreed with him, but he simply chuckled and added, "Your mother and I live here. We don't need permission to improve our home." "Steve knows about these things," she acknowledged. "He's just trying to help." The woman who formerly loved those bookshelves and used to place her collection of antique teacups on them for Christmas now acts as though they were just taking up room. I showed her Dad's thorough house maintenance plans, but she disregarded them as dwelling in the past. Additionally, the relationship with Steve's children has deteriorated. James has taken over Dad's workshop and transformed it into a CrossFit facility. While I was on a business trip, he held a garage sale and sold the majority of Dad's tools. By repainting rooms and installing modern vinyl planks in place of Dad's meticulously refinished hardwood floors, Lisa is treating the space as though it were her own personal design project. One evening after dinner, Steve grabbed me aside and said, "Since we're paying to live here, we should have our names on the deed. It's only fair." I had to explain him that they don't pay a mortgage because Dad's planning has paid for the house in full. They don't even cover their rent. All maintenance expenses, insurance, and property taxes are paid for by me. Emily recommended that we stop making weekly visits. Now that Emma is here, she is correct, no one benefits from the stress in that household. However, taking a back seat has only made Steve more confident. He began sending me bills for improvements that I never approved, and he began making them more regularly. I should be more sympathetic of Mom's new life, according to Mom's sister, who called me recently. I attempted to explain Dad's intentions and my legal obligations, but she simply accused me of being trapped in the past. "Steve makes her happy. Why can't you just let them make the house their own?" she asked. I found out this week that the growth markers that recorded my height from the ages of 3 to 18 had been removed from the kitchen door frame. Every birthday, Dad would measure me and write the date next to each mark. It's just an old door frame. We can't keep every piece of wood just because your father touched it, Mom remarked when I confronted her about it. I now spend more time sitting in Dad's old chair, the only piece of furniture I was able to keep, in my own garage. Mr. Anderson advises me to begin considering long-term fixes. Legally, the house belongs to me, but I will eventually have to make some difficult choices regarding its destiny. When does being the bad guy become more important than preserving your father's legacy? And when your whole family opposes you, how do you defend the moral high ground? Update 2. I appreciate all of your advice regarding my previous post. The situation has reached a breaking point and I've finally made a choice that will most likely alter everything. I spoke with my financial advisor about the house situation last week. We may make a sizable rental income, enough to cover Emma's future college fund, because nearby property values have risen by 40% in the last 3 years. I discovered at the discussion that I had been so preoccupied with the sentimental elements that I had failed to take into account the financial ramifications of allowing Mom and Steve to live rent-free. Everything went haywire when I brought this up to Mom in our weekly conversation. She yelled into the phone, "You can't do this to us. This is where we call home. Steve has worked really hard on it." She refused to listen when I tried to explain that I was only considering my choices. She continued to talk about all the enhancements they had made, utterly disregarding the fact that I had never given my approval for these changes. An hour later, Steve called. He was upset, and his tone was different from his usual arrogant demeanor. "Listen here," he announced. "In this house, we have established a life. Because you're missing your father, you can't just walk in and ruin everything." He interrupted me when I attempted to explain the financial issues, stating that they now had sweat equity in the property. I reminded him that the house belonged to me legally. "There's a reason why Dad left it to me." "Your father isn't here anymore," he replied. "You must consider the living." I talked to Emily about it and talked to Mr. Anderson about it before deciding on it the following day. When I arrived at the house, Mom and Steve were working on yet another remodeling job. In the dining room, they had begun ripping out the original crown molding, which Dad had specifically milled to blend in with the house's antique style. That image made me more determined. "They have 2 weeks to find another place to live," I told them. Mom burst into tears at once, accusing me of being callous and harsh. Steve tried to scare me by arguing with me about my inability to throw them out on the street. He began enumerating all of their local ties, including his place of employment, their church, and their neighborhood pals. When faced with challenging circumstances, I maintained my composure and firmness, as my father had taught me. I declared, "This is my property. Dad left it to me for a reason, and I'm exercising my legal right as the owner." Steve's cheeks flushed, and he began to enumerate all the money they had spent on upgrades. I informed him that the historical value of the property had actually been diminished by these unapproved alterations. When Lisa returned home and joined the debate, things became worse. Mom utilized her pregnancy as emotional leverage right away. "How are you able to treat your stepsister in this way? She will give birth to a child." Although Lisa's pregnancy is significant to them, I had to tell them that it does not affect my property rights and that she is not my stepsister. There has been an ongoing assault of emotional manipulation ever since. Mom's whole family has banded together to oppose me. Her sister called, sobbing, and said their parents wanted to make sure Mom was safe. Messages regarding the challenging rental market were left by Steve's brother, a local real estate agent. Long messages on Christian ideals and family loyalty are even coming from distant cousins who I hardly know. Dealing with family friends who have known me since my early years is the most difficult. People who grew up with me now tell me how unhappy they are with my decisions, and every call seems like another tiny betrayal. Some even claim that I'm damaging Dad's standing in the neighborhood. The problem is that this has nothing to do with cruelty or profit. This is about honoring Dad's desires and preserving the things he created. It has been agonizing enough to see them methodically destroy all traces of him. The house was his legacy. I've paid for all of their expenses, allowed them to live rent-free for years, and put up with their unapproved changes. Eventually, enough is enough. They have 2 weeks to come up with new plans. I'm refusing to give in to Mom's constant demands for more time. Mr. Anderson claims that the law is entirely on my side and that I have been more than giving. He is assisting me with creating official paperwork for the notice to vacate, ensuring that everything is accurately documented. I realize that this makes me appear to be the villain in everyone else's tale, but sometimes standing up for what's right requires making difficult choices, even when others disagree. I learned that from my dad. Third update. We appreciate everyone's help at this trying time. Things have come to an unavoidable end, therefore this will likely be my last update. I assigned Mom and Steve a 2-week deadline, but it's already passed. The past 2 weeks have been the longest of my life. They have been filled with guilt-tripping, continual emotional manipulation, and progressively frantic attempts to get me to change my mind. Mom did everything she could. Every day she called, oscillating between fury and tears. She would say, "I changed your diapers," one day. "I gave up everything for you," she would yell the next day. Steve also changed strategies, trying to negotiate instead of using intimidation. He recommended establishing a formal lease and offered to begin paying rent. I couldn't rely on them to uphold whatever agreements we made though, given what they had done to Dad's house. When I got to the house, there were people gathering on the front lawn 3 days prior to the deadline. Mom had enlisted the help of friends from church, family, and even some of Dad's former business partners. They had prepared statements about moral commitments and family responsibilities as part of what amounted to an intervention. I listened to people criticize me for being a bad son for 2 hours. The topic of honoring your parents was discussed by Mom's pastor. Dad's old secretary remembered his generosity with tears in her eyes. My elementary school teacher even came to remind me of the morals my father had attempted to teach me. The hardest part was when Lisa got up and talked about how stress could hurt her unborn child while covering her pregnant abdomen with her hands. While Mom was crying next to her, a few of the church women were glaring at me. It was an expert lesson in manipulating emotions. But during this ambush, an unexpected event occurred. I had a strange sense of serenity as I sat there listening to everyone talk about Dad, people who hadn't even been to his funeral suddenly professing to know what he would have wanted. Dad used to say, "Stand your ground when you know you're right," and I could almost hear his voice in my thoughts. I got to my feet and spoke to the group. I described how Dad planned everything carefully to ensure his family's future and how he had constructed this house by hand. I showed them pictures of Steve's unapproved modifications, including the historical elements he ruined and the fine craftsmanship he removed and replaced with flimsy modern fixtures. After that, I presented them with a letter from Dad outlining his reasons for leaving everything to me. Some of the elder business associates nodded as I read his remarks about trust, accountability, and preserving his legacy. They understood because they'd known Dad, really knew him. Shortly thereafter, the group scattered. While some looked disapproving, the righteous wrath had subsided, and others gently apologized as they walked away. Without saying another word, Mom and Steve returned inside. I showed there with Mr. Anderson and a locksmith on the morning of the deadline. Although they weren't required, I had hired a security company to be on hand just in case. The house was deserted. The remainder of their possessions were packed into Steve's truck. Steve couldn't help but give me a last poke, but Mom refused to look at me. As he assisted Lisa into his pickup, he asked, "You're happy with yourself? Your father would be so proud of how you've treated your mother." I didn't answer. Dad would have known. I know he had prepared for this possibility. What other reason might he have had for being so explicit in his will? I strolled about the home after they had left. I had underestimated the extent of the harm. Builder-grade materials had been used to replace the original fittings. Dad had painted over or taken out his handcrafted woodwork. We had spent so many weekends at the workshop, and it had changed completely. I have no intention of pursuing damages, but Mr. Anderson documented everything for any legal considerations. I simply want to put this chapter behind me and concentrate on fixing what can be fixed. Some of Dad's old craftsman friends have already been contacted, and they are eager to assist in rebuilding the features that were taken out. For now, Mom is staying with her sister. The majority of my relatives have stopped talking to me altogether, however some sometimes call to chastise me. On social media, Steve's children continue to share heartbreaking updates about their poor mother being thrown out of her home, but fewer people are responding to each post. Through it all, Emily has been my pillar of support. She reminds me of Dad's letter whenever I begin to doubt myself, expressing his faith in my ability to make the right choices. I will eventually tell Emma about her grandfather and the heritage he attempted to preserve, but she is too little to comprehend what is occurring right now. To restore the house to its original state, I'm collaborating with a restoration professional. We can preserve the spirit of what Dad made, but it won't be perfect. Some things can't be reversed. First, the workshop will be restored. The same place where I learned from my father is where I want my daughter to study. Being the villain in someone else's tale is sometimes the price of doing the right thing. I may never be able to rebuild the relationships I lost, but I can live with the fact that I preserved what my father trusted me with. As Dad used to say, integrity is about doing the right thing, even when it hurts, and not about taking the easy route. I believe he would comprehend. My last update will be this one. I appreciate everyone's support along this journey. My family favored my sister and ignored me at her wedding, but at mine, she reconciled by gifting me our grandmother's heirloom bracelet. As a 42-year-old who has struggled with complicated family matters for as long as I can remember, I believe the time has come to tell my tale. To put it mildly, my relationship with my 38-year-old younger sister has never been easy. I've always felt like I was playing second fiddle in my own family, and it's obvious that our parents have always preferred her above me. Almost every element of my life, including my relationships, professional decisions, and even sense of self-worth, has been influenced by this emotion. My sister was the center of my parents' attention from an early age. I was more introverted and, to be honest, lonely, but she was always the gregarious, popular one. I very well recall the celebration for my 10th birthday. Only a few of the students who were invited by my parents came up. My sister, who was only 6 at the time, managed to steal the show and keep everyone entertained with her antics. When I stealthily went away to my room, holding back tears, my parents hardly noticed because they were so preoccupied with her. I was merely there at school, while my sister was the life of the party. "Why can't you be more outgoing like your sister?" is something I've heard more times than I can count. "And your sister is so lively, why aren't you?" These comparisons never stopped, gradually eroding my sense of self-worth. I began to think that there must be a problem with me, that just because I wasn't like my sister, I wasn't good enough. The preference only became more obvious as we got older. I made a valiant attempt to forge my own professional path, but my parents never seemed to appreciate it. It has always been, "You should network more like your sister." Or, "If you were as charming as your sister, you'd get promoted faster." Every achievement I made was compared to my sister's, and they always thought I fell short. I gave my best to my work in the hopes that my parents would eventually recognize my value if I could just achieve enough success. As I advanced in my job, I gave up my personal life to work late into the night and on the weekends. I recall working 80-hour weeks for months on end on one particularly taxing job. I was thrilled to contact my parents to tell them that I had finally gotten a significant client for my business. How did they react? "Oh, sweetheart, that's lovely. Have we informed you of your sister's recent employment? It will be 6 digits for her." That was always the case. It was never enough for them, no matter how high I climbed. In contrast, my sister managed to get by on her charm and the steadfast backing of our parents. Please understand that I adore my sister. She is not a nasty person, and I am aware that our parents' different treatment of us is not her fault. However, it might be difficult to avoid feeling bitter at times, particularly when she appears unaware of the privileged treatment she receives. My sister got married last month. It would be an understatement to say that our parents were ecstatic. They dedicated a large portion of their cash as well as their hearts and souls to organizing the wedding. I thought it may be an opportunity for us to strengthen our family ties, so I offered to assist with the preparations, but I was graciously turned down at every stage. "Oh, you're so busy with work, we wouldn't want to bother you," they'd reply. In actuality though, they didn't want me to get involved. I made an effort to be upbeat, telling myself that it wasn't about me and that it was my sister's big day. However, I began to feel increasingly alienated from my own family as the wedding day drew near. When I learned that my parents had asked my sister's best friend to be her maid of honor without even taking me into consideration, it was the last straw. My mother simply remarked, "Well, you're not really the maid of honor type, are you?" when I challenged them about it. "We believed that a lower function would better suit you." The actual wedding day was challenging. My sister was praised throughout our parents' remarks, which included stories about her early years and their pride in the lady she had grown into. Not a word about me was said. They acted as though I didn't exist and that the 3 of them made up their entire family. On the inside, I felt like I was crumbling, but I sat there trying to smile. I heard my mother speaking to one of her friends after the ceremony. "We're so relieved," she remarked. "We were worried we might never get to experience a wedding day like this." It was obvious that they didn't believe I would ever get married. The worst was still to come, but it felt like a kick to the belly. My mother drew me aside later that night. I briefly entertained the idea that she may express regret for not included me in the remarks. Rather, she said something that will always stick in my memory. "Don't stress about your wedding. Since this might be the only one we get to plan, we put our all into it." We wanted to ensure that we did it correctly. Something broke inside of me at that very instant. All of the years I had spent feeling inferior and attempting to get their acceptance came tumbling down. However, it also seemed as though a fog had dissipated. I realized for the first time just how poisonous our family dynamic had become. The problem is that I'm not some lonesome spinster that they should be concerned about. 39M, my amazing fiancé, believes in me and loves me for who I am, not what he believes I should be. He has supported me through all of this family dysfunction over our 2 years of dating. It was him who persuaded me to go to therapy and begin addressing my problems with self-esteem. 3 years ago, I met my fiancé during a seminar at work. I was reluctant to let him in at first. I'd been scared of partnerships for years because I felt unworthy. However, he was gentle and patient, gradually dismantling the barriers I had put up around myself. I can still clearly recall the instant I knew I was falling for him. As we spent a peaceful evening together, I told him about a challenging workday. He simply listened without trying to solve problems or make things better. Then he said, "You realize how wonderful you are? You are amazing in the way you approach problems and the way you take pride in your job." I felt genuinely noticed and valued for who I am for the first time in my life. All of this familial drama has been greatly supported by my fiancé. He has comforted me when I've sobbed following tough phone conversations with my parents. He has urged me to put my own mental health first and to establish limits. Furthermore, he has never made me feel inadequate or likened me to my sister. Since college, 41F, my incredible best friend, has been by my side. When I'm feeling overwhelmed by self-doubt, she's always there to remind me of my strengths. She repeatedly reassured me that I deserved more while holding me while I sobbed after the wedding. In my life, our connection has consistently provided encouragement and affirmation. She has witnessed my darkest moments and has never passed judgment on my difficulties with my family. Rather, she has consistently provided me with a sympathetic ear, a shoulder to weep on, and occasionally a harsh reality check when I begin to internalize my parents' criticism. Building a life away from the influence of my family has also been greatly aided by my best buddy. She is the one who inspired me to follow interests and pastimes that I find enjoyable, even if they don't align with my parents' preferences. Because of her, I've developed a love for painting, which I never would have attempted if my only goal had been to please my parents. For me, these painting sessions have turned into a kind of therapy where I can release feelings that I've suppressed for years. I'm currently working to take back my life and my self-esteem. I'm attempting to strengthen my sense of self while in treatment and healing from years of emotional neglect. It's not simple. On some days I can still hear my parents' judgmental voices telling me that I'm not good enough. However, I'm learning to confront those ideas and remind myself of my own value and potential. My fiancé and I are discussing our own wedding plans, which will be small and personal and accurately represent who we are as a pair. It's thrilling, but it also evokes a wide range of complex feelings. To show my parents that I'm deserving of a celebration, I secretly hope to have the lavish wedding my sister had. However, I'm making an effort to remind myself that this day should be about me and my fiancé, not about giving my family proof of anything. I'm also trying to figure out why my sister and I are treated so differently by our parents in therapy. According to my therapist, my parents' actions may be a result of their own fears and unmet expectations. With her gregarious demeanor and social success, my sister might be the embodiment of everything they've always wanted to be. They might be reminded of their own perceived shortcomings by my more reserved demeanor and emphasis on professional achievement. This lets me see them as flawed people rather than as all-powerful people whose approval I must gain, even while it doesn't justify their actions. However, I'm having trouble deciding how to proceed with my family. I want to completely cut them off in order to shield myself from more harm. I also harbor the hope that we might be able to mend our friendship. However, I'm not really sure where to begin. I've considered going up to them and telling them how they've harmed me over the years, but I'm scared they'll just brush it off as they always do. Even worse, they'll reverse it and blame me for my sister's success, saying that I'm the issue because I'm too sensitive or envious. According to my fiancé, I ought to offer them one final opportunity to get together and discuss our relationship openly. He thinks there's a chance they would realize and desire to change if I can articulate how their actions have affected me. He has volunteered to support me by being present if I choose to have this chat. However, my best friend believes that I should put my own recovery first and avoid them, at least for the time being. She fears that attempting to mend the relationship before I've resolved my personal problems completely could hinder my advancement. Instead, she said, I might want to write them a letter to describe how I feel without having to respond right away. I'm conflicted. They are my family, on the one hand. A part of me still yearns for their affection and acceptance in spite of everything. There are both pleasant and painful memories in me, such as my mom consoling me after my first heartbreak and my dad teaching me how to ride a bike. I question whether it's worth struggling for those moments of connection. However, I'm worn out after years of trying to live up to their expectations only to be ignored and underappreciated all the time. I'm concerned that if I keep talking to them, I might not be able to get well and go on with my life. Additionally, I fear that my future children will experience the same suffering and insecurity that I have. As I type this, I'm aware that I've never really put all of these emotions into words before. It is both overpowering and somewhat freeing. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to attempting to fulfill the expectations of my parents. I'm now at last beginning to understand who I am and what I desire. I'm looking to you, Reddit, for guidance. How would you respond if I were you? How can I handle this complicated familial situation? Should I concentrate on starting a new family with my fiancé and friends who genuinely care about me? Or is there any chance that we may mend our relationship? If any of you have experienced comparable circumstances, how did you respond? Was it best for you to keep your distance from your family, or were you able to mend your relationship with them? How did you handle the guilt and the pressure from society to keep family ties intact if you did remove yourself? I appreciate you reading this far. I realize it was lengthy. Finally sharing something with someone, even if they are only complete strangers you met online, feels nice. I would be very grateful for any guidance or words of encouragement. I feel like I'm at a fork in the road and don't know which way to go. However, I am aware that I cannot stay in this state of uncertainty and keep looking for unfulfilled acceptance. A change is needed, but I'm not clear what that modification should entail. First update. 2 months have passed since my last post, and I wanted to give you all an update on what has been going on. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who read my tale and gave me advice. Your assistance has been priceless. The most significant shift has been in how I view myself. I've been going to therapy regularly, and my self-esteem is really improving. I'm working through years of emotional maltreatment and continual comparison to my sister with the support of my therapist. Although it's challenging, I'm coming to value myself regardless of my family's opinion. It has been beneficial to keep a wins journal. I jot down one accomplishment, no matter how minor, every day. I'm gradually coming to terms with the fact that, despite what my family may believe, I am competent and deserving. I've also shared my difficulties with my coworkers. Unexpectedly, a lot of others had comparable experiences, which made me feel less alone and opened up some fantastic mentorship opportunities. My relationship with my fiancé has undergone the biggest shift. Our relationship has strengthened as we prepare for our wedding. Throughout it all, he has been my pillar of support, always ready to listen and offer uncritical support. We've discussed our future in great detail, including how we want to handle family dynamics with our own prospective children. Speaking up about my anxieties of repeating the habits I was raised with has been both frightening and freeing. In addition to being understanding, my fiancé has pledged to constantly work with me to establish a kind, encouraging household. While talking about wedding arrangements last week, an unforgettable moment occurred. To show my family that I'm deserving of a celebration, I acknowledged that a part of me wants a lavish wedding like my sister's. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, my fiancé replied. I want our wedding to be about us, not your parents or anybody else, because you deserve to be celebrated every day. His remarks served as a warning. I came to the realization that I was still unconsciously trying to win my parents' approval. We have now made the decision to organize a wedding that accurately captures who we are as a couple. We have made some firm decisions. We intend to have a small, private ceremony with only our closest friends and family, perhaps at sunset on the beach or in a garden. We wish to honor our love and dedication in a cozy, happy setting. We're thinking of combining our love of the outdoors with the romance of beginning a married life by going trekking in a national park for our honeymoon. But I'm not sure if I should invite my sister and parents to the wedding. Reconciliation is something I wish for, but I'm afraid they'll ruin our day or say something cruel. My fiancé has been encouraging and has promised to support my decision no matter what. In order to establish clear guidelines for acceptable behavior, he has even offered to speak with my family if we invite them. My maid of honor, who is also my best friend, has been a huge help. She has immersed herself into the wedding planning process, and her excitement for this new phase of my life has been a lovely diversion from my complex familial feelings. She has been gently encouraging me to think about my own desires, apart from any obligations to my family. I am reminded by her that today is your day. You deserve to be in the company of people who truly appreciate you. 2 months later, I'm in a lot better place. I'm beginning to see my own power and have more faith in myself. I'm learning that family is about people who support you without conditions, not simply genetic ties, and I'm creating a future with a partner who genuinely cherishes me. However, I continue to struggle with how to deal with my biological family. Should I risk drama by inviting them to the wedding? Should I speak with them again before making a decision? Or ought I to concentrate on this new phase of my life? Reddit, I'd love to know what you think. How have you responded to comparable circumstances involving weddings and family? I would appreciate any guidance on establishing limits or having challenging conversations. Once again, I appreciate your help. Having this place to reflect and share is really meaningful. I'll keep you informed as events develop. Second update. Since my last update, which was a month ago, a lot has transpired. I appreciate all of your suggestions and encouragement regarding my previous post. We decided to invite my sister and dad after considerable discussion with my therapist and fiancé. We took our time creating the ideal invitation, attempting to mix being warm with setting up appropriate boundaries. I didn't get the response I was hoping for. My mother called me 3 days after I sent out the invites. She initially appeared thrilled, but then the inquiries began. Why is the wedding so small? Do you not wish to have a formal celebration as your sister did? She laughed when I told her that we wanted a small ceremony that was true to who we were. You've always been really challenging. For once, can't you simply act normally? I made an effort to maintain my composure by applying the strategies I've been learning in therapy. I clarified that since it was our day, we intended to celebrate it any way we saw fit. My father picked up the phone at that point. I have been speaking with your mother, he stated forcefully. We believe that this little wedding is a mistake on your part. Family members find it embarrassing. What are people going to think? I was taken aback. They continued to care more about looks than about how happy I was. I remained calm and informed them that although I valued their opinions, the choice was definitive. My father was upset and my mother was crying as the call ended. My fiancé was there to encourage me even though I was shaken by the call. Reminding me that their response was about them and not about us, he held me while I sobbed. My sister sent me an unexpectedly encouraging text the following day. I called her, bewildered. At first our chat was difficult, but she opened up as we spoke. She remarked, I've been considering our relationship a lot. I had no idea how much you were going through. You know, I've always envied you. I was surprised. Did you envy me? But the favorite was always you. She gave a sorrowful laugh. I always felt like I was living in your shadow, maybe to our parents. You were really intelligent and motivated. I believed that in order to receive any attention at all, I needed to be the life of the party. For the first time in years, we actually spoke for hours on end. I apologized for the resentment I had held, and she apologized for the instances in which she had been disrespectful. It seemed like a beginning, but it wasn't a miracle solution. But a new problem has emerged as a result of our increased knowledge. My sister wants to contribute to the wedding and play a significant role in it. I'm excited about the prospect of repairing our connection, but I'm also cautious. Could it be that this is merely preparing me for further disappointment? Although he believes it's a good step, my fiancé is letting me make the final decision. My best buddy, who reminds me of all the hurt I've endured in the past, is more wary. She remarked, it's acceptable to have hope, but remember to take precautions as well. I'm conflicted. Though I'm afraid of exposing myself to additional suffering, this could be the start of a new, healthy relationship with my sister. Then there is our parents' problem. If my sister is involved but they are kept at a distance, how would they respond? Regarding the actual wedding, we are proceeding with our preparations. We've located a stunning garden location that embodies the private, romantic ambiance we're aiming for. We've decided on a color palette, selected flowers, and begun researching catering choices. I'm getting enthusiastic about these details despite the familial drama. Regardless of who shows up, it serves as a reminder that this day is about celebrating our love. Throughout everything, my fiancé has been my pillar of support. He's given me space when I've needed to think things through alone, been understanding when I've needed to rant, and given me advice when I've asked for it. I'm even more convinced that marrying him is the perfect choice because of his consistent support. I'm focusing on establishing and upholding limits in my treatment. In order to prepare me for any challenging situations that may come up, my therapist has been helping me rehearse reactions to possible events at the wedding. Having to prepare for a confrontation on what should be one of the best days of my life makes me feel empowered, but it also makes me a little melancholy. I'm at another fork in the road, Reddit. Should I accept my sister's offer to assist with the wedding, which could lead to a reconciliation but also increase the likelihood of further harm? How do I strike a balance between the need to protect myself and my desire for family harmony? Furthermore, how can I deal with my parents' criticism without allowing it to ruin our special day? Any guidance or first-hand knowledge would be very valued. Again, I want to thank everyone for their support. You have no idea how much it means. Third update. A week has passed since our wedding, and I wanted to give everyone who has helped me along the way this last update. Everything's all occurred so quickly, and I'm still absorbing everything. I gave my sister's offer to assist with the wedding a lot of thought before accepting. Although it was a risk, I thought it was worthwhile. There was a lot going on in the days before the wedding. I was astonished at how well my sister and I worked together on the last-minute details. Although there were tense moments, we were able to resolve them and have open communication. The actual wedding day was tense. My parents were seated in the front row as I started down the aisle. My father actually grinned at me while my mother wiped at her eyes. It was something, even though it wasn't the kind of proud, warm smile I had always wanted. The ceremony was kind, intimate, and all we could have imagined. I felt as though everything else vanished as my fiancé and I exchanged vows. We were the only ones making pledges to one another at that very moment. My sister came up to me with a tiny wrapped surprise during the reception. An exquisite silver bracelet that had belonged to our grandmother was found within. She gave me the bracelet, which had been a source of conflict between us for years, as a gesture of goodwill. My father later asked me to dance, which surprised me. He remarked, "Your mother and I, we may not have always understood you, but seeing you today, you seem happy." As we moved uncomfortably to the music. Incredibly joyful. It felt like an acknowledgement, but it wasn't an apology. The remainder of the evening was a haze of joy, dancing and laughter. Although there were tense times, it was a happy occasion all around. Throughout it all, my new spouse was by my side, cheering me on in the good times and encouraging me in the bad. My sister took me aside one final time as we were heading out on our honeymoon. "I want you to know that even though our relationship hasn't always been easy, I'm proud of you," she said. "Additionally, I hope that we can continue to improve our friendship." Since the wedding, the days have been a combination of peaceful introspection and honeymoon delight. Disengaged from the outside world and concentrating on one another, my spouse and I hiked in a national park for a fantastic week. I'm trying to take in all that happened now that we're home. Since I got back, I've been seeing my therapist, and we've been discussing how I feel about the wedding and how it will affect my future relationships with my family. She has reminded me that it's acceptable to still feel conflicted while also encouraging me to recognize the constructive actions that were performed. My spouse and I have discussed limits and the type of connection we hope to have with my family in the future. We acknowledge that maintaining open communication is important, but we also recognize that our small family must come first. Since the wedding, my sister and I have texted each other a few times. They have been friendly yet hesitant. Next week, we're going to get together for coffee to discuss this further. Although there is still some tension with my parents, there seems to be a change. When my mother called to inquire about the honeymoon, the conversation was a little stilted, but it lacked the criticism I've grown accustomed to. I'm struck by how much has changed as I think back on the entire experience, from my first post to this point. I'm not gullible enough to believe that our family's problems are all behind us. I'm aware that much work remains to be done, but I feel hopeful for the first time in a long time. This process has taught me a lot about who I am. Even when people don't value me, I've learned to set boundaries, stand up for what I want and value myself. I've discovered that while it's acceptable to wish for improved ties with my family, their acceptance does not determine my value. Above all, I've discovered that family isn't just about blood, it's also about the people who encourage you, share in your happiness, and support you through your hardships. Through this, my best friend, my spouse, and even some of you on Reddit have been like family to me. I want to let anyone who is dealing with comparable family problems know that things do get better. It may not be flawless. It may not be what you had anticipated. However, there is still hope. Don't be scared to set boundaries. Surround yourself with people that genuinely care about you and keep improving yourself. Once again, I want to thank everyone for their support along this trip. I have greatly benefited from your counsel, support, and shared experiences. Without you, I couldn't have survived this. Cheers to fresh starts, recovery, and building the kind of love and support that each of us deserves. I was always the forgotten one in my family, but now they want me back. My next decision will change everything in my life. In my family, I, 42, have always been the unnoticed child. I'm not sure how to respond to my parents' sudden desire for me to return to their lives. There is a big age difference between myself and my 5 siblings, of which I am the youngest. As a child, I frequently had the impression that my house was a parallel universe. I was just there, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who was easy to forget, while my siblings were in and out of hospitals and therapy sessions all the time. One of my first memories is of returning home from school to find the house deserted. Nobody checked my schoolwork or inquired about my day. Everyone was too preoccupied with my siblings' problems to realize that I also needed to eat, so I learned to cook for myself early. I vividly remember how disappointed I was when my parents failed to remember my birthday for 3 consecutive years. They were just overwhelmed. It wasn't that they were awful people. I suppose they felt they didn't have to worry about me because they had 4 children who were coping with different health and mental health problems. I was the normal one, the healthy one. However, it's not as easy as it seems to be the normal one in a chaotic family. Throughout his childhood and adolescence, my 52-year-old oldest brother had to spend a lot of time in the hospital due to a serious chronic condition. He still has health issues and is largely dependent on our parents for assistance. Since I can remember, my 50-year-old elder sister has been in therapy or taking medicine for her early struggles with anxiety and depression. The 48-year-old twins who are the middle siblings needed special education and ongoing care due to their learning difficulties. Then there was myself, the last person to consider. The one who was supposed to comprehend, to be self-sufficient, to simply be there. It was out of need that I learned to be independent. I was essentially rearing myself by high school. I knew that grades were my ticket out, so I earned them. Not because anyone pushed me. I joined clubs and teams for the opportunity to spend as much time away from home as possible, not for the recognition. I remember one specific instance from my junior year of high school. It meant a lot to me that I had advanced to the debate state finals. I had put a lot of effort into it, practiced late into the night and given it my all. In the weeks before the finals, I mentioned it to my parents several times. I was set to go when I stepped downstairs on the morning of the event, wearing my finest attire. Frazzled as usual, my mom replied, "Oh, are you going somewhere?" as she hardly looked up from a stack of medical bills. I tried not to sound hurt as I reminded her about the debate finals. "It's today, I told you about it." She responded, "Oh right." But it was obvious that she couldn't truly recall. "All okay, good luck. We have to take your brother to his doctor's appointment, therefore your father and I are unable to attend." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Naturally, and always has been, my brother's health came before my argument. I made it to the finals by myself and finished in second. Nobody inquired about my experience when I arrived home. For weeks, the certificate I was given remained on my desk, hidden from everyone else. My getaway was college. I finally felt like I could breathe after deciding on a school on the opposite side of the nation. I made friends that didn't need to be reminded of my birthday, genuinely saw me and paid attention when I talked. M and C, 2 of them, grew to be the family I never had. MC and I made the decision to remain together after graduation. We started establishing our life after relocating to a new state that was far from any of our relatives. Determining that I made a difference, I threw myself into my career and I was successful. Now that I'm 42, my life appears to be going well. I run a skilled team as a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 firm, and I'm renowned for my creative problem-solving and ability to perform under pressure. Ironically, I became quite good at drawing attention to myself and making things visible because I was raised invisible. Meetings, presentations, and decisions occupy my days. Even though I put in a lot of overtime, I enjoy my job because it gives me a sense of worth and purpose that I didn't have as a child. People at work pay attention to what I have to say because they see me and respect my viewpoint. I never get tired of the euphoric feeling. My life is comfortable while I'm not working. I have a small but close-knit group of friends, I travel whenever I can, and I possess a lovely condo with a view of the city skyline. My best college pals, M and C, are still my pillars of support, and I've formed other deep bonds. We host movie marathons, game evenings, and weekend brunches. I've been addressing issues of abandonment and persistent feelings of invisibility in therapy for years. Although the process has been drawn out and occasionally difficult, it has improved my understanding of who I am. I've learned to respect myself, set limits, and quit looking to those who can't give me approval. My interactions with my family have been sparse for the past 20 years, rare visits every few years, and infrequent phone calls on holidays. To shield myself from the hurt of their apathy, I kept them at arm's length rather than cutting them off entirely. Then, unexpectedly, my mother called last week. We hadn't spoken for more than a year, and our most recent contact had been a clumsy exchange of pleasantries, so I nearly didn't respond. But I had to pick it up for some reason. Without even saying hello, she continued, "We want you to come home for Thanksgiving." She sounded older and more worn out than I could recall. "You are missed by your father and me." It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. "Do you miss me?" When I was growing up, where was this? When none of them appeared after I graduated from college. When I built a life for myself for 20 years. I stumbled. "I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. Work is really busy right now, and I have plans with friends." "Are you planning with friends?" Her voice assumed that tone of remorse that I was all too familiar with from my early years. "Your family is us. If you need to alter your plans, your pals will undoubtedly understand." Family seemed like a hollow term. After feeling like an afterthought my entire life, what did it mean? She went on to say, "Your siblings will all be here." Apparently oblivious to or choosing to disregard my reservations. To have everyone together once more would mean so much. I was filled with resentment. Is everyone back together? First of all, when had we ever been together? I couldn't recall a family meal where someone wasn't experiencing a crisis, going to therapy, or being admitted to the hospital. I finally said, "I'll think about it," to put an end to the discussion. However, I knew I wasn't going as soon as I hung up. I became physically nauseous at the idea of sitting around a table and looking like we were a happy, regular family and everything was good. 1 week later, I'm still debating the choice. I had a tiny kid-like want to leave, to think that perhaps, at last they noticed me. That perhaps they wish to make amends because they regret how they treated me. However, the mature side of me, the one that has had treatment and undergone the arduous process of recovery, is more aware of this. They haven't called because they've suddenly realized how much they've been ignoring me. My siblings are still having difficulties, they are growing older, and they have come to the realization that I'm the only one with their lives in order, which is why they are phoning. I'm their fallback option, not their daughter. I can't quit thinking about it though. What if I'm mistaken? What if this is a sincere effort to get back in touch? Am I being unforgiving or overly harsh? Or am I at last defending myself and establishing sound boundaries? I thought I had dealt with the feelings that the call had evoked. More than in years, I've been thinking back on my early years. I had a dream the other night that I was back in my former bedroom, shouting loudly, but no one could hear me. I felt like that forlorn, invisible youngster again as I woke up in a cold sweat. It also has an impact on my work. I was thinking about my family when I slept off at a crucial meeting yesterday. My team took note and continued to give me worried glances. I have a reputation for being calm and attentive, yet after just one phone call, I feel like I'm losing it. After discussing it with M and C, they both believe I shouldn't go. They have personally witnessed the harm done by my family and the years it has taken me to recover. They fear that returning home will reverse all of my gains. There is nothing you owe them, M stated firmly. Don't allow them to pull you back into their drama. You've created a wonderful life for yourself. C was more tactful. Remember how long it took you to stop flinching every time the phone rang? I know it's hard, he continued. When you first started establishing limits with them, how many panic attacks did you experience? Is all that development worth the risk? I am certain that they are correct. However, that little voice of the young child who merely wanted her parents to notice and adore her is still inside of me. Perhaps this time will be different, she's whispering. They might finally be the family I've always desired this time. M and C also remind me that I have the freedom to choose, and they will be there for me no matter what. And I'm grateful for that, but it doesn't help with the decision. So here I am asking random people online for guidance. Is it improper of me to want to go? Is it selfish of me to prioritize my mental well-being over a family reunion? Or, after being ignored all my life, am I now acting in my own best interests? Even though Thanksgiving is still a few months away, I can't stop thinking about this. I'm struggling to focus at work and fall asleep. I become anxious every time my phone rings, wondering whether it's them calling again. A part of me wants to stop communicating with them, block their numbers, and carry on with my life as it has been. However, another part of me feels bad about even thinking about it. Even if they weren't particularly good parents, they are still my parents. I have no idea what to do. I'm not sure how to make sense of the difference between the accomplished, self-reliant adult I've become and the lonely, invisible child I was. I'm not sure whether I can deal with my family without becoming that frightened, abandoned young child again. What should I do, Reddit? Should I risk rehashing old wounds by attending this Thanksgiving dinner? Or should I keep my distance and possibly ruin any possibility of a reconciliation? When your parents suddenly want you in their lives after decades of ignoring you, how do you handle it? I would appreciate any guidance. I could really use an outside viewpoint because I feel like I'm drowning in uncertainty. Update 1: About 2 weeks have passed since my last post, and while I would like to claim that things have become more obvious, they have really gotten more confusing. Though recent events have taken me by surprise, I appreciate all of the support and advice. It has given me a lot to think about. First, my older brother, who has long-term health problems, called me out of the blue. It was unexpected to see his name on my caller ID because we haven't spoken face-to-face in years. I briefly believed that something horrible had occurred. His voice seemed older and more worn out than I remembered when he said, "Hey sis. Have you got a moment? We need to talk about something serious." I felt shivers down my spine at his tone. He seemed to be speaking for the entire family, and it sounded menacing. He went on. Mom and Dad have been talking, without waiting for me to answer. As they age, they are concerned about the future and who will look after things after they are gone. A knot started to form in my stomach. I hoped I was mistaken, but I had a feeling I knew where this was going. When they can no longer care for one of the boys, they want to appoint you as their legal guardian. The boys referred to our brothers who suffered from serious illnesses. It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. Protector? Me? For most of my childhood, they hardly acknowledged me as the invisible child. What? I choked out. Why me? Why now? My brother let out a deep sigh. Look, I realize this is a lot to ask, but you are the only one who is truly stable. Everyone else has their own problems. You've succeeded. You're in control of your life. They believe you to be the ideal option. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Suddenly, after years of being neglected and treated as an afterthought, I was given this enormous duty. It was like a horrible joke and it felt unreal. Have they even considered asking me about this? With a voice trembling with rage and incredulity, I demanded. Or were they just going to spring it on me at Thanksgiving? The person on the other end of the line paused for a while. When he eventually said, they were hoping to discuss it in person. I thought you should know beforehand, give you time to think about it. Consider it. How could I possibly consider being guardian of a brother that I don't really know? A sibling who has spent decades taking care of our parents. I can't do this, I replied, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. I can't just take on this duty and drop everything. My life is my own. Plans of my own. My brother remarked, I know it's a lot, in an apologetic tone. They're desperate though. They must have confidence that someone will cover for them while they are away. I sat in startled silence for what seemed like hours after we hung up. It was all so utterly ridiculous. After years of ignoring me, they now wanted to put this huge responsibility on me without even consulting me. I thought things couldn't get any more confusing, but a few days later, I got a letter from my mother. It was lengthy, meandering, and chock full of the same guilt-tripping jargon I recalled from my early years. She continued by talking about how difficult things had been for them, how much they had given up for the family, and how much they needed me right now. Near the end was the section that truly affected me. Sweetheart, we're not asking for much, she wrote. All we need to know is that someone will take care of the family while we are away. Our only hope is you. Just hope. I mean, how many times did I need them? When I was growing up, feeling unwelcome and invisible, where was there hope for me? Ever since I got that letter, I've been a complete disaster. I've struggled to focus at work and sleep. My group has observed. Meetings have had to be rescheduled because I simply cannot focus. Every part of my life is being impacted by this circumstance, and I detest it. They still have this control over me, and I detest it. For an urgent wine and venting session, I invited M and C over. On my part, they were both indignant. They can't do this to you, M exclaimed, her eyes glimmering with rage. They cannot expect you to be their safety net after ignoring you for decades. It's unfair. C remained supportive but was more measured. He added softly, you need to consider what's best for you. Not what they desire or what's best for them. What would you like? What am I looking for? It's a straightforward question, but I'm having a terrible time coming up with a response. A part of me, the young child who constantly sought her parents' favor, longs to say yes and to be the decent daughter they never thought I was. However, the mature me, who has put a lot of effort into creating a life and identity apart from my family's shadow, is yelling no. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to proving my value to them, to being noticed, to being appreciated. And they want me to sacrifice everything now that I'm at last living a life where I am respected and seen. To suspend my life. To tidy up the mess they created. I become more irate the more I consider it. I'm not being asked to join the family. They want me to be their guardian and caregiver. They want a promise that their issues would be resolved when they leave, not a relationship with me. I've made up my mind after spending hours discussing it with M and C. I will not be attending Thanksgiving. I will not act as their guardian. I refuse to allow them to drag me back into the dysfunction from which I have so desperately fled. It won't be simple, I know. I'm aware that there will be emotional manipulation and guilt trips. However, I am also aware that I am worthy of better. I should be able to live the life I have created for myself without having to deal with their disregard and demands. I will give my brother a call back tomorrow to inform him of my choice. After that, I'll send a letter to my parents outlining my reasons for not attending Thanksgiving and my inability to fulfill their wishes for me to be their guardian. Even though I know it's the correct thing to do, it will be difficult. I'm afraid. I'm depressed. I'm pleased with myself for finally putting my needs first and putting my own health ahead of their expectations, even if I still want things to be different. Thank you to everyone who left a remark on my previous post. During this trying time, your words of support and encouragement have been invaluable. After a lifetime of feeling invisible, it means more than you can imagine to feel seen and understood. After speaking with my family, I'll provide another update. Good luck to me. I suspect that I will require it. Update 2. I feel like I've aged years in a matter of weeks since my last update, which was around a month ago. My family's predicament has escalated in unexpected ways, and I'm still in shock over all that has transpired. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who left a comment on my previous post. During a very trying period, your guidance and encouragement meant the world to me. I heeded your advice, and when I needed it most, it gave me the courage to defend myself. I declined the position of guardian for my siblings and chose not to attend Thanksgiving, as I said in my previous update. After calling my brother to inform him of my choice, I wrote a letter to my parents outlining my justifications. For a time at least, I believed that would be the end of it. I was mistaken. When I got home from work last week, my 70-year-old mother was waiting for me at the door. I was so shocked that I almost dropped my keys. She has never come to see me before. Not even when I bought my condo, when I got my major promotion, or when I moved into my first apartment. But here she was, standing at my door as if she had every right to be there, looking older and more worn out than I remembered. "Mom," I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She took a while to respond. She simply stared at me, her gaze sweeping across my face as if she had never seen me before. Perhaps she was. When she eventually stated, "We need to talk," her tone was forceful but gentle. "It's not good for your father. The physicians say." She trailed off, tears welling up in her eyes. I experienced a little twinge of guilt. I was unaware that my dad was ill. Then I realized that I hadn't known since they hadn't informed me. Because unless they require anything from me, they never tell me anything. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. "I'm sorry to hear that," I added, trying to sound impartial. "But I don't see what that has to do with me." My mom's eyes became wide with surprise. "He's your dad," she cried out. "How can you say that?" "Is he?" The venom in my voice surprised me as I shot back. When has he ever acted like a father to me? I briefly believed my mother might try to enter when she moved forward. I remained steadfast in the doorway, preventing her from entering. I wasn't going to give her access to my personal space or the life I had created for myself. "Please," she begged, her voice adopting the guilty tone I so vividly recalled from my early years. "You are necessary. I am unable to manage things on my own because your father is constantly in and out of the hospital. Your siblings." "My siblings?" I interrupted her. "My siblings always." "Mom, what about me? At what point did you need me for myself rather than what I could provide for everyone else?" She gave me the impression that I had slapped her. "That's not fair," she remarked. "You have always been cherished by us. We have always supported you." I was unable to resist. I chuckled. The sound reverberated along the deserted corridor, loud and terrible. "Are you there for me? When? You forgot my birthdays. When? When did you miss my final debate? When did you not attend my graduation from college? Please let me know exactly when you were there for me, Mom." I briefly had a surge of gratification when my mother's face crumbled. She was at last experiencing a small portion of the suffering I had endured for years. She said, "We did the best we could," with a broken voice. "You have no idea how it was to attempt to keep everyone alive and well. There was no time for," I concluded, "for me, for her. I wasn't ill, so you didn't have time for me. Since I wasn't creating issues, due to the fact that I was invisible. For a long time the burden of decades of unsaid hurt hung between us as we stood there in quiet. When my mother eventually responded, 'I'm sorry,' I briefly thought she was telling the truth. That's not how we intended to make you feel. You are loved by us. You are necessary to us. Come home, please. Assist us." My eyes pricked with tears, but I blinked them away. My family has brought me enough tears. "I can't," I stated firmly. "I refuse to. Now, Mom, I have a life of my own, one I created without you. I won't sacrifice that to serve as your contingency plan." "Backup plan?" she asked again, raising her voice. "Do you believe this to be that? We are your family." I answered, "No." And even I was astonished by how definitive my voice sounded. "You aren't, no longer. I decided to choose my family. My friends, who have helped me, who have stood by me, who have seen me when you had no desire to look." With a look of disbelief and hurt on her face, my mother gazed at me. She remarked, "So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on us?" I gave a headshake. "No, Mother. It's been a while since you abandoned me. I'm simply leaving at last." She didn't answer. Rather, she turned and strode off, her shoulders hunched in surrender. I was both relieved and saddened as I watched her leave. It seemed like the end of something. Possibly the loss of hope and the hope that my parents would one day see me and show me the kind of love I needed. That should be the end of it, I thought. I believed I had stated my stance clearly. However, as usual, life had other ideas. My brother called me a week following my mother's visit. His words, "My father passed away." I sat there looking at my phone, not sure if I should feel guilty, relieved or sad. The news seemed to be about a stranger rather than my own father, and I felt numb. According to my brother, the funeral is next week. Will you come? After closing my eyes and inhaling deeply, I answered, "No, I don't think I will." The other end of the line was silent for a long time. My brother finally answered, "I understand." And I was shocked to hear that he didn't sound judgmental. "Take care of yourself, sis." I sat for a while after I hung up, reflecting about my early years, my father, and our unfulfilled connection. I recognized that I no longer needed his attention and praise after reflecting on all the times I had wanted for it. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to gaining my family's affection and attention. In actuality, though, I no longer require their approval. I am proud of the life I have created for myself. I have a career I'm enthusiastic about, friends who adore me, and a sense of self-worth independent of other people's opinions. The passing of my father feels like the end of a chapter, a depressing one, full of unmet words and lost chances. However, it's already over, and I can't alter it. I just have to keep going. I will not be attending the funeral. Neither my mother nor my siblings will be contacted. It's not because I'm angry or spiteful. I've moved on from it. It's just that I've come to the realization that I no longer belong in that environment. I've outgrown it. I want those who might criticize me for my choice to realize that it has nothing to do with forgiveness or the lack of it. It has to do with protecting oneself. It's about realizing that sometimes walking away is the healthiest course of action and that some relationships are too damaged to be repaired. I'm no longer upset. I'm not depressed. I'm just free from the burden of unmet expectations, free from the hurt of being ignored and underappreciated, and free to live my life as I see fit without the dysfunctional shadow of my family hovering over me. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has followed my story and provided encouragement and guidance. During one of the most trying times in my life, your comments have given me courage and consolation. You've given me the confidence to advocate for myself and put my needs ahead of those of others. My last update will be this one. I'm concentrating on my future from now on, one that I can control and that is unencumbered by the burdens of my past. In some ways, it's frightening, but it's also quite freeing. I want to let everyone know that it's acceptable to make your own decisions, especially if they are in a similar circumstance, are having trouble meeting expectations from family, or feel unnoticed or underappreciated. Even if the ties are with family, it's acceptable to leave them if they are hurting you. You are worthy of being appreciated, seen, and loved for who you are. One final time, I want to thank you all for being the encouraging group of people I never had as a child. You can never know how much your understanding and kindness have meant. My parents made me the other kid, while my sister became their golden child and destroyed my life. I can't make my update without it, so I'm reposting it. Except for this caption, nothing has changed. It's just as it was before the moderators of the entitled parents took it down. After reading a similar experience online, I felt compelled to share my own. I'm publishing this as my one and only Reddit post since I felt that sharing it might make me feel a little better. I've had some counseling, and discussing this topic in particular was quite beneficial. Why not just share it online as well, I reasoned. This year, I turned 18, and I recently moved out on my own, away from my parents. My sister is roughly 10 years my junior. She almost didn't make it to term because her pregnancy wasn't intended. Since I was never given much information, I don't know many specifics about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, but I do know that it was extremely taxing on her body, as my sister's birth prevented her from having any more children. That year, she spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. My mother also nearly died during the birth. Because my younger sister might not have been born, it caused her and my father to get attached to her. With the exception of times when they needed a free babysitter, I felt like the other kid in the house ever since. My parents' long-term favoritism has led me to believe that they were truly insane for failing to recognize the precise harm it was causing to me. And now, starting with my 11th birthday, I'll describe how it's rebounding on them. My sister was 2 years old when she wept upon seeing a birthday cake that wasn't hers, therefore my parents asked me to let her blow out my candles. My parents had me do it even though I didn't want to. The moment felt totally wrecked, but they relit the candles so I could do it again later. The following year, the year after that, and so on, all experienced the same thing. They simply persisted in enforcing it until it was standard. My birthdays also had to include gifts for my sister. Hers never had any on mine. They simply said that I'm a boy and boys don't need to worry about it as much, when I questioned why. I understand that I was a child, but did they truly believe that what I said was wise? Not at all. Every time I had a birthday, my parents would pick a location that my sister preferred above mine. After a while, it seemed more like I had no birthdays while my sister had two. Beyond this, my sister became the center of my parents' entire existence. My sister had to agree with me if I wanted to do something. Otherwise, it was vetoed unless I could complete it by myself. Video games didn't seem to bother me there, until my sister wanted to come in and irritate me, so I learned to just lock myself in my room with them. That's why I locked the door. I was an irate teenager who was sick of being interrupted at any time, so when my parents asked me to take it off, I freaked out. My parents were mad at me for being nude in my own room, and my sister repeatedly ran in when I was naked. They retracted their objection and simply let me keep the lock after I pointed out how ridiculous it was. Because she was being pampered every day, my sister developed a princess complex. I avoided her as much as possible since she was highly demanding. I used every justification I could find to avoid dealing with her, even if it meant making things up, in order to have some alone time. I had more alone time once my parents hired a teenage girl to watch me. After my sister refused to listen to her, the babysitter quit, and my parents attempted to avoid paying her by saying she did a poor job. After the girl enlisted the help of others, my parents ultimately gave her the money she was due. After that, they recruited a second girl to watch the kids on a regular basis, and she stayed. I went out of my way to keep myself occupied with my part-time job whenever I could, but my parents still made it obvious that I was expected to care for my sister on any day I had free time. My sister gave me directions and treated me like her own butler. She would not quit using her ridiculous moniker for me. The mere mention of that moniker gets me furious. She would call our parents and cry if I didn't give her whatever she wanted, and I would then face consequences for mistreating her. This led to a lot of heated disputes between us, and once I refused to give in anymore, my relationship with my parents deteriorated to the point that we hardly spoke to each other for a while. However, they had the audacity to boast to other parents that they were the reason I put in so much effort during my high school graduation. Although they weren't incorrect, the explanation they were considering wasn't the one that actually occurred. I put a lot of effort into waiting to be free. However, my parents pretended to have accomplished a lot. Perhaps they did, prior to the birth of my sister. After that, though, it was all about her. Unless parent-teacher conferences were approaching, they didn't even inquire about my schooling. I received a B and C average when I graduated. Even though the trip was supposed to be for me, my sister always had more fun than I did when my parents took me there after I graduated. However, everything really came to a head in July, when I turned 18. Despite the fact that it was my 18th birthday, it didn't seem to be about me. I fervently hoped that, for once, we would be dining at my favorite restaurant. Instead, they had the celebration at Chuck E. Cheese, a local copycat. It became the go-to location for anything big because it was the only one like it in the area. Kids half my age were having their celebrations all around me. I had nothing to do but eat terrible pizza and play outdated arcade games and claw machines for tickets to insignificantly expensive prizes since I was so bored. My parents then produced a pink cake with white flowers on it when it was time for cake. It was clearly not a boy cake, even though it bore my name. There were only 10 candles, which was worse. In front of my sister, my parents blew out the candles and placed the cake. That's when it happened at last. I suddenly experienced a mental flashback of all the repressed annoyance. I then broke down in tears. I was crying in front of the entire family as an 18-year-old boy. Time appeared to stop because everyone was so shocked. All of the things I had been suppressing for the last 8 years just poured out like word vomit when I woke up. The whole family was able to see it. I went outside to sit beside the family car after I was finished. My parents kept the pink cake covered until it was served, so many relatives followed me to apologize and explain that they were unaware of it. The fact that they were unaware didn't matter, I said. For the past 8 years, Little Miss Sunshine had dominated my life while they all looked on. My celebrations and birthdays were all about her, so I didn't really have any of my own. Then, on the most important birthday of my life, they all expected me to simply nod and smile as usual while they gave my sister a cake that was specifically for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. Some of them began apologizing to me, but they gave explanations, claiming that they simply assumed I was fine with it since my parents had told me so. I informed them that I would never tolerate it. I just pretended to accept it after my parents made me do it every year. I instructed them to glance around as I spread my arms. Did this seem like the location I had in mind for my 18th birthday and graduation celebration? All this time, nobody even made an effort to defend me. My sister had it all, and I was just the other kid. My parents stopped allowing me to invite my friends long ago after they attempted to express their disapproval of my sister blowing out my candles, so I never even got to have them there. Was wanting a year that was about me and not her really that bad? There are 365 days in a year. Instead, because I want my own birthday, I'm treated like the entitled, avaricious brat that I am. I resumed my nasty crying. By then, my mother was sobbing too, so my father rushed outside to scold me for creating such a big spectacle. Everyone in the room now believes they are awful parents because I destroyed my sister's moment. I shouted back at him that he should understand why they are bad parents. The rest of the family surrounded him like a swarm of wolves when I said that. I had never seen anything like it before, but I guess it was better late than never. The majority of the throng rushed back inside with my father to argue with my mother after he was virtually backed up to the restaurant's front entrance. My grandparents stayed with me and expressed regret for spending so much time with their eyes closed. I'm not sure what was said to my parents in the restaurant, but they didn't return for around 30 minutes. They appeared completely defeated when they did. Both of my parents were unable to look me in the eyes, and my mother was still sniffling after sobbing so much. Both of them made clumsy excuses for their actions and promised to have the party somewhere else. However, the crowd didn't find it to be sufficient. My parents emphasized that they would never force me to let my sister blow out my candles again, give her gifts on my birthday, or make it about her in any way. One of my uncles cleared his throat pretty loudly. In addition to apologizing for bringing me a cake that was clearly not intended for me, there was another loud cough. They claimed they believed that at my age, cake was no longer a concern for me. Whoa, that was a terrible thing to say. I lost my temper again and screamed at them that it didn't matter how old I was. For years, they had given my sister my birthday without any justification, and they were aware of it. I informed them that since it was too late, there was no need in having the party again. They had made it quite evident that they didn't care about me. I brought up the fact that they had destroyed 8 years of my life before I reached adulthood. What birthdays with them would I be able to anticipate in the future? My father became upset with me for saying so, but he stopped talking after the whole family yelled at him. My grandfather informed him that I was entirely correct and that the harm could not be reversed. He claimed that ever since my sister was born, my parents were terrible individuals who took advantage of me and treated me like a black sheep. Furthermore, he claimed that they were all terrible because they simply allowed it to occur. He went on to say that I owed my life back, not just an apology. I resisted her attempts to approach me as she sobbed my name and apologized. But my mother broke down once more. She was body blocked from approaching half of the household. I just remarked that I was at my breaking point and turned to go. I was found and brought back by one of my aunts. I was so angry that I couldn't even be happy for any justice after all this time, even though I could hear several family members screaming and swearing at my parents over what had transpired. And throughout all of this, where was my sister? She was still eating cake and tearing apart gifts that were intended for me alone in the restaurant. In case anyone was curious, when I sobbed and left, my parents did offer her some cake. They were later called out on it, even though you would assume it wouldn't be their main concern right now. As everyone else left the party, my grandparents persuaded me to settle down and take a seat in their vintage minivan. When my sister was discovered to be opening my gifts, she pitched a fit. One of those gifts was a brand new smartphone, which she was not permitted to retain, so she hurled it against the wall and destroyed it. A few months prior, on her own birthday, she had received a brand new phone. In the end, I became so angry that I ranted about never wanting to have another birthday party. I was allowed to spend the night at my grandparents' place. I still hadn't spoken to my folks when I got home. My father remained as silent as I did, and my mother simply kept crying because I wouldn't talk to her. My grandparents persuaded me to join them for dinner the next weekend. I was shocked to discover a completely different party waiting for me when we arrived. Almost the whole time, my parents were there, grinning awkwardly and saying, "Don't hate us." A large chocolate cake with 18 candles and even a banner with my name on it was present. Since I didn't actually get to celebrate either this year, They dubbed it my happy belated birthday and graduation party. I had to act like I was delighted. 8 years of partiality cannot be reversed or even somewhat impacted by a one nice party. What happened to my sister? It wasn't all about her like it used to be, so she was sitting at the table with her arms folded and her lip twisted. The family sang me a modified version of Happy Day instead of Happy Birthday. My sister let out an ear-piercing scream as soon as I extinguished the candles. My parents, appearing more distressed than ever, had to take her out quickly and return her later. For the remainder of the celebration, she sulked in silence in her seat. My sister was punished for her actions at the last party by having her smartphone taken away, while I was still given a new one. However, there were other gifts besides the smartphone. My entire family helped out and bought me a car. Even though it was only an old white Volvo, I fell in love with it right away. My grandfather, who had some automotive knowledge, had fixed it himself. My sister was obviously not as delighted as I was. She threw a fit and demanded a car as well, letting out another one of those yells. It took some time for them to return outside after my mother had to take her to the restroom. My father simply returned to his dejected appearance. Their attempt to appear respectable in front of the entire family had been essentially wrecked by my sister. My sister was acting that way because my parents brought her up to be a pampered, entitled princess, according to several family members who also had harsh things to say about them. I immediately began driving the automobile around, but a few days later, my sister damaged it by smashing 2 side windows with a hammer and severely damaging the windshield, rendering the vehicle unusable. She screamed bloody murder as my parents grabbed her and removed the hammer, but they were able to stop her before she could do further harm. She even made an attempt to bite them. My grandfather had worked so hard on that car that everyone, especially my grandparents, was upset with my sister. It was destroyed by my sister's outburst. My sister was so indulged by my grandparents, they acknowledged, that she was unable to process the notion that I could have something that she was not able to. My sister was being raised to be an entitled brat by my parents, who were criticized by a number of other family members for setting her up for failure. They said that because my parents wouldn't enforce their rules and instill respect in her, my sister would have a horrible adult life. She was not unpunished for her acts. My sister was sent to boarding school at the beginning of the new school year after being grounded for the remainder of the summer. My father maintained that it was the only way to begin repairing the harm they had caused, despite my mother's tears. Yes, they admitted their mistakes wholeheartedly. Since no one took their side, it was difficult for them to hide it. At the boarding school, my sister is very miserable. She has been lying nearly non-stop and despises the rules and the outfits. But now that there are cameras everywhere, she can't get away with any of it. She yelled at our parents for placing her in that situation despite their repeated attempts to visit her. I've heard that she might live like this until she turns 18. My car's repairs were covered by my parents. The windshield and windows were replaced by an auto glass firm, and the vehicle now has the same appearance as before. My granddad approached me in August about a job possibility with a friend, but it was 40 minutes away. Unless I liked the lengthy journey, I would have to leave my parents' house. I was all for relocating. It was difficult for me to find my first flat. To get a studio, I had to have my credit card approved, but I was able to do it. Since September, I have been residing here. I don't talk to my parents very much, yet they keep trying to reach me. When we do speak, I always feel uncomfortable and uneasy. According to my grandfather, my parents are attempting to get in touch with me because they are unable to cope with their parental failures. He believes that in order for them to feel better about themselves, they want me to forgive them. However, I will not be forgiving them anytime soon. At last, I'm content and no longer with them. Now they have nothing. Not only do they lack my sister, they also lack me. The cost of my sister's boarding school, in addition to the party they held for me and the repairs they made to my car, forced my parents to work longer hours. All they have left is their job to concentrate on, an empty house, and irate relatives. Although I don't enjoy their suffering, it is ultimately the consequence of their own deeds. Edit. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has given me awards. It holds great significance for me. Despite the fact that my piece was lengthy, I felt a great sense of relief after finishing it. In the comments, I saw some people accusing this post of being phony. I don't hold anything against you. If I were reading this, I would also be quite skeptical. I did, however, live it. That is the reality for some parents. People who had comparable or worse circumstances have even gotten in touch with me. Is it truly so strange that my parents behaved in this manner, given the abundance of horrible parents in the world? I come from a close-knit family where we stick together and do things as a group, so it may sound extreme for the entire family to rush back into the restaurant to confront my dad. At gatherings, It can quickly become the whole group versus one individual. I've witnessed it previously, such as when a cousin who was intoxicated was surrounded and taken away from a gathering to become sober. Although I really dislike collective mentalities, they were helpful in this situation. Words cannot express how ashamed my parents were of what they had done. They were unable to come up with a suitable explanation for their actions without coming across as even worse. They have essentially given up, acknowledging that they have no justification and are making a concerted effort to win my favor. I believe that a large portion of my relatives' assistance was motivated by shame, even though many of you are thanking them for it. With the exception of 2 years during COVID, the majority of them attended those 8 birthdays, but they kept quiet. When my sister blew out my candles, they may have given me a critical look, but they remained silent. Why? My grandfather, the patriarch of the family, is the father of my father. My grandfather can be rather frightening. He will assist you in whatever way he can if you're on his good side. The whole family despises you if you're on his bad side. That's a major factor in my distaste for group mentalities. My grandfather felt embarrassed when he remarked that the whole family was to blame for not supporting me throughout those years. They all contributed to the price of my vehicle. They didn't need to make a significant individual contribution because they had so many relatives. Even the receipt from the time I registered the vehicle in my name is with me. They paid $2,000 for it, plus additional money for tires and parts. My granddad adjusted the fluids and tuned it himself. The interior was thoroughly cleaned by my grandmother. Even though I'm incredibly grateful to each of them, I still wish to keep my distance. To figure things out on my own, I need time. It is likely that I will not see my parents again until Christmas or Thanksgiving. My sister has been likened by some to South Park's Eric Cartman, and it's a fairly accurate comparison. Because my parents gave her a lot of junk food, she is overweight. She despises eating anything nutritious. She once topped mashed potatoes with gummy bears, as I witnessed. I feel sick just thinking about that combination. She also spent a lot of time in the restroom as a result of her bad diet. In order to assist, my parents had to purchase fiber snacks, which I don't believe were inexpensive. My sister always believed she was in charge and is also very bossy. She was always giving me directions, so I would frequently lock myself in my room to avoid her. Because she was so domineering, she lost a lot of friends, but my parents assured her that the youngsters were envious of her uniqueness. When things didn't go her way, my sister would even call herself a princess and have big tantrums. Although I'm aware that she is more than a caricature, her actions definitely remind me of Eric Cartman. I am aware that my sister is also not a moron. She simply doesn't put out any effort and only received a C average in school. She would most likely receive straight A's a student if she put in the necessary effort. Second edit. It appears that the subreddit has banned me. I'm not sure what I did, perhaps the post was too lengthy. In any case, I am no longer able to respond to comments, but I would want to thank everyone who left encouraging words. Thank you everyone from the bottom of my heart. Update. Here is what has transpired since my parents began celebrating my sister's birthday 8 years ago, for anyone who are curious. It has now been almost a year. I thought I was done here, so I didn't log in for a while. However, one day I decided to check in again and saw a ton of private messages requesting updates. The majority of what I'm going to share with you is based on what my parents and grandparents told me. I'm recounting what I discovered, so don't worry if it seems too bizarre. Yes, I'm doing great, but my parents and younger sister aren't doing so well. My sister made a number of attempts to leave boarding school after I last posted. She tried doing nothing, but it didn't help her. And none of her plots or falsehoods succeeded. She then tried going on a hunger strike, not eating anything until our parents arrived to get her up. My father prevented my mother from jumping into the automobile to save her baby, reminding her that they were to blame for my sister's actions. After fewer than 2 days of her hunger strike, my sister started to seek food in the cafeteria. Snacks and sweets were strictly prohibited at school unless they were nutritious. My parents had received a warning from a pediatrician that unless my sister's nutrition improved, she could develop diabetes in the future and possibly experience stunted growth. Gummy bears on mashed potatoes are out. My sister attempted to bully the other girls at the boarding school, of course, but they didn't put up with her bullshit. She got into a quarrel one day and was attacked by many girls who kicked her until a teacher intervened. My sister was scraped and bruised all over, but she wasn't terribly hurt. She blamed everyone else, of course, and said the other girls should follow her instructions. It should come as no surprise that her peers avoided her. She couldn't understand not getting her way, so she threw a fit. My sister was busted when my mother attempted to sneak junk food to her at the boarding school. My parents got into a heated argument as a result. Although my sister still craves junk food, My mother stopped smuggling it after being caught. My sister eventually turned to self-harm as her schemes became more complex in an attempt to influence her way out of the school. Unbeknownst to her, she stole a knife from the cafeteria and stood on a table, threatening to leave without chocolates. Candy indeed. She broke her left arm, her clavicle, and suffered a concussion when she slid and tumbled off the table during a chaotic time. Even the boarding school didn't want her back at that point. She was admitted to a children's mental health facility after leaving the hospital. She is currently receiving treatment for extreme narcissism, which my parents really encouraged. Unless my parents take her out, she is unable to leave the ward. There, she continues her education and follows a rigorous, healthful diet that she hates. It is personal agony for my sister. My father and I got into yet another heated argument when my mother sought to remove her from the ward. My mother took a bottle off the counter during the dispute and struck him with it, severely slashing his face and shattering his cheekbone. After the police were summoned, my mother was driven away in a police car and my father was brought to the hospital. After that, she spent several months in a mental health facility where she was compelled to face her enabling tendencies and trauma. I don't know the details, but from what I've learned, my mother's behavior is a result of unresolved issues from her own upbringing. My parents are now merely sleeping in different bedrooms, though there has been discussion of a divorce. Regarding myself, I recently turned 19. At a restaurant I enjoy, my grandparents hosted a celebration for me. Although my sister was temporarily permitted to leave the ward for the event, my parents and sister were present. She sat there looking at me like she hoped I would burn, her lip twisted. Because of her forced healthy diet, she had lost weight, but her resentment had not gone away. This time, she didn't scream as I extinguished my candles. Rather, she started sobbing uncontrollably while repeatedly asking why. It was merely another attempt at manipulation. Eventually, she pitched a fit, screaming that there was nothing. No pizza, no presents for her, no prizes. She then began to curse at our parents and made an attempt to leave the restaurant. She was clearly attempting to emulate my actions during my 18th birthday celebration, but it was just another example of her incapacity to acknowledge that not everything is about her. In a twisted manner, she was essentially attempting to replicate what I had done the previous year. I know my sister, even though you might think I'm overanalyzing this. She will take action if she believes it would help her achieve her goals. My grandfather spoke to my parents before they brought my sister home early after apologizing to everyone. My grandmother later provided me with some information. According to my grandfather, my parents had better not give in to my sister's requests or host her own party. He cautioned them that unless they permanently stopped supporting her, this conduct would never stop. After hearing this, my sister recognized that her outbursts were no longer effective. The following morning, she was driven back to the ward after being escorted out of the restaurant while kicking and crying. She is currently there. I'm not sure how long she'll be there. Even though she is only a child, she is the most obstinate person I have ever encountered. Until she reaches her lowest point, I don't think she will change. She's trapped in a situation that doesn't allow her to make demands until then. Not even my parents have attempted to hold me responsible for my sister's behavior during the previous 12 months. They've got to acknowledge that they brought her up to be a narcissist and that I had nothing to do with this. I've discovered that supporting a narcissist is a type of addiction. The only mental disorder my sister has been diagnosed with is narcissism, which she inherited from her upbringing. She has an IQ of about 110, which makes her somewhat smarter than me, but she only works hard when she receives a reward. She was conditioned to think that way, and I think it will take years to change. Regarding myself, I'm succeeding on my own. Although it's difficult, I've had to learn how to manage my finances and take care of myself, but it's still far better than living with my sister and parents. Edit. Someone pointed out that it doesn't make sense for my sister to be in a long-term facility for narcissism alone. It usually wouldn't, I agree. I'm being kept in the dark about any more diagnoses. I can sense that my parents aren't telling me everything, and since I'm not her parent, I can't just question the doctors. Nevertheless, when she doesn't get her way, my sister can be incredibly harmful to herself. It wasn't the only time she threatened herself at the boarding school with a knife. She has used similar threats to control my parents ever since she was admitted to the ward. For instance, she threatened to hurt herself if they didn't take her out for fast food after my 19th birthday. She frequently hits her head against the wall as a strategy. My mother didn't want to report this to the ward, but my father did. My sister has also made up claims of being harmed by doctors, but they never add together. Another element in her situation may be pathological lying, which is probably a major reason she is in a long-term facility. The cycle would repeat if my parents gave in to her demands once more if she were at home. I believe Little Miss Sunshine is relying on it. Third update. My knowledge of Little Miss Sunshine has increased. First of all, I acknowledge that I erred in some of my previous writings, including misrepresenting her age and other specifics. Anyone in my family who reads this would recognize me, even though I'm terrible at arithmetic and frequently try to hide facts to remain anonymous. To be clear, my sister blew out my birthday candles for the first time when she was 3 years old, and I was 8 when she was born. I was bitter as my parents began honoring her on my birthdays from the very beginning. By the time I turned 11, everything revolved around her, presents bearing her name, places she enjoyed, and her assisting me in unwrapping my gifts. Even if my parents acknowledged their mistakes, the years they stole from me still remain. Concerning the diagnosis of my sister, although a person cannot be officially diagnosed with narcissism until they are 18, my father acknowledged that she exhibits symptoms of potential NPD and other disorders. Due to the experiences she experienced as a youngster, my mother was also diagnosed with PTSD and another mental illness. Since my sister is their problem, not mine, my father advised me to overlook the fact that my parents have kept many details ambiguous. One of the most sensible things he has ever said to me is that the present condition of Little Miss Sunshine. She has no definite release date and is still in the ward. Although some of her anger has been tamed by therapy, she still feels entitled to all I own. She even demanded her own apartment during outbursts regarding mine. She has also continued to think that my birthday is hers. She was brought up that way, and my parents are solely to blame. They have requested me to keep quiet about the matter, stating that there is no assurance she will recover and that years of therapy will be necessary. In addition to taking medicine and attending treatment, my mother has become lethargic. She was temporarily committed for beating my father, but for some reason, she kept her job. Her employer let her to work from home for a lower salary. My viewpoint, since my actual birth date is eternally marred, I have made the decision to celebrate my birthday on the day of my belated celebration going forward. Returning to Reddit has caused me stress, even though I thought I was doing okay. My supervisor sent me home for the day because I'm so irritable and cynical. To deal with this, I'm thinking of looking for free counseling or local support groups. I am grateful to everyone who has read and comprehends my suffering. Although you have shown me kindness, I must concentrate on moving past my past. I may never come back here or respond to comments. Last edit, I discovered that I had committed math mistakes once more after reading my post again. My supervisor told me to take a sick day because I've been such a mess. Stress even made me throw up. Another post I came across showed parents chopping up their older child's personalized birthday cake for their golden child. This and other posts like it made me realize how many parents are just like me, changing only after embarrassment but remaining the same on a deep level. I'm cutting off communication with my parents and will talk to my grandparents about it more. I might not make another post here. I'd like to thank everyone who helped me. Wife left me and came back with a baby, begging for a second chance. Am I the asshole for shutting the door in her face? You've heard the phrase, "I never saw it coming," repeatedly? For me, it was precisely that way. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed that we were in agreement and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that, at least in my opinion, we both desired children. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly talk about how she wanted 2 or 3 children, what we would name them, how we would furnish the nursery, and other details. She would even plan this life with our future children while browsing baby gear and clothing online. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. Everything appeared ideal, and we were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together. However, we received some terrible news that left me speechless. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. All those plans we had suddenly disappeared, and I felt worthless. I was really hit hard by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that she would be content with just the 2 of us and that it didn't matter. However, there was something strange about the way she said it right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was talking about having a family 1 minute and then she was claiming that she didn't need children to be happy. Don't get me wrong, I understand that individuals have second thoughts, but her entire demeanor seemed strange to me. She had stopped thinking about baby names and was now completely avoiding any conversation about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never said before, Like how I wasn't taking care of myself or that perhaps I should work out or do more around the house. Indeed, I may have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. It was different with the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely following the rules. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a rut where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. "I'm happy as long as we're together," she would remark, but I never really understood. She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. She suddenly tells me that she wants to go a girls' trip. She had gone on a few excursions with her friends before and I had always encouraged her to do so it wasn't strange for her to do so now. She had been talking for a time about wanting to travel to America with her pals, and we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. "Thank you for being so supportive," she added, turning to face me. She sounded so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude, even though I found it a little strange that she would say that. It's not like I'd done anything really noteworthy. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know that she had landed because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but nobody picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, by the time morning arrived, I had still to hear from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. I even went so far as to call her friends, who were meant to accompany her on the trip, in the hopes that perhaps her phone had malfunctioned or she just hadn't had time to check in. However, since they weren't traveling with her, they were also perplexed when I contacted them. Back at home they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It dawned on me then that she wasn't traveling with pals, wasn't on a girls' trip and hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I attempted to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a flight that connected or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her stating "thank you for your support" and the entire girls' trip scenario were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up, as if I were living in a nightmare. I didn't marry this woman. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text or anything else. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. She gathered her belongings and disappeared. The assurances I had given myself the previous evening, that perhaps she was late or her phone had died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. I felt as like I had been a stranger to her the entire time and had been left to work it out on my own, without any clue as to what went wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. I would constantly ask myself what went wrong. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. I realize this seems dramatic, but I was completely fixated on finding the solution, as if it would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People would notice and inquire about my well-being, to which I would just respond that I was occupied with personal matters. Declaring aloud that my wife had abandoned me without saying a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still worry about her even when I was with them, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her. The incessant inquiries from strangers, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. "How's married life treating you?" And "How's your wife?" are the questions they would pose. It was always like pulling off a new scab. I would just smile and tell them that everything was good because I lacked the courage to tell them that she had left, but every time I uttered that lie, it seemed more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. I thus located a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial to speak with a neutral person who was unfamiliar with her, me, or any of our baggage. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake repeatedly reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she chose to leave, and it was her decision, not mine, and that there was no magical moment that would have kept her here. It was a difficult pill to take. I thought for a long time that I was flawed in some manner, which was why she had left me, but gradually I began to view things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my own efforts alone. The realization that it wasn't hurt. As time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. However, I had a lot of free time now and was unsure of how to spend it. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. As I began to feel more like myself, I started to put more effort into my work, but at first I was just going through the motions and barely keeping up with my workload. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all. The extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I tried to ignore would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having someone by my side who wasn't involved in the mess and could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I invested far too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the conclusion of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had at last begun to seem normal again. Or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when she was somehow involved in every part of my existence. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be delighted to see her. And yes, it really got to me because I had assumed I was no longer interested. As it happens, meeting her again evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I just stood there and stared without saying anything. She asked, "Can I come in?" With no embarrassment after grinning at me as if nothing had happened. The nerve. Really, she just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and assured her, "No, you can stay there and explain." I didn't want her in my home, bringing all the craziness back into the one area I had created for me. Despite her somewhat disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and began telling her story. "I know this might come as a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything," she said. She even had a hopeful expression on her face, as though she really thought I would be willing to listen to her. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her, not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing about our second chance was unbelievable. It sounded like we would just pick up where we left off, with this child acting as some sort of miraculous reset button. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by claiming she wanted us to be a family once more and that although she had made a horrible mistake, we could now start over as just the three of us. The one question that has been bothering me ever since she arrived was finally asked. "What made you go?" I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just nod and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and knew she wanted me back by that point. As simple as that. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. Here she was confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, and had his child, and now expecting me to accept it, as if I would simply forgive and move on. "You went, met someone else, and had his baby, and now you think you can return and act as if nothing happened?" I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized for her terrible error. However, I was completely unmoved by that. She kept talking about how she knew we were meant to be together and that I was the person she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so naive that I was shocked. Her expression was one of desperation, not love, and I could see it. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. I couldn't stop wondering, who does she think I am? I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her bluntly, "You have to live with the decision you made a long time ago. Here, there is no second chance." She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no. As if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a feeling of relief as I realized that I was now seeing her for who she truly was, as if her true colors were being revealed in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or quarrel with her. "We're done," I simply remarked, glancing at her. "You finally have the life you've always desired. I no longer have responsibility for this." I cut off any last statements she might have had by closing the door in her face. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, knock, weep, anything. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. The woman I had married and loved was no longer with me. This stranger, who believed she could pick up the pieces whenever it was convenient for her, took her position. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it after I shut the door behind her. I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. Instead, though, she began pounding on the door and shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine, the only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. In order to let her know that I was paying attention, I slightly opened the door, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard we could work things out. I was unable to contain my laughter at that moment. I actually laughed because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. "You left," I informed her. "You tossed everything away while you had the chance. I won't just act as though nothing occurred just because you want to." She began repeating things like, "You don't understand how hard it was for me." As her cheeks flushed, she continued by talking about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had discovered her error too late. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. She lost her temper at that point. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of unfairness and lacking the grace to give her another chance. In fact, she dared to declare, "I could have taken everything from you back then if I'd wanted to. I could have stolen half of your possessions." I simply stood in awe. This woman, who had abandoned me without saying anything, now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to defraud me, as if she should be commended for not being as awful as she could have been. I said to her, "What the heck? Should I feel thankful that you simply left me without taking anything with you?" She looked at me with a mixture of fury and another emotion on her face, possibly desperation or remorse, but to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been bearing was finally lifted when I saw her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay. Here she was, the one who ruined everything we owned. She became more louder and continued to complain about how I had forced her to leave in the first place when she realized I wasn't going to back down. She said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I bluntly told her, "Look, you could have told me the truth if you really wanted a child. When you were making plans to go, you didn't need to lie to me and act like nothing was wrong." She merely gazed at me as if I had smacked her, with nothing to say in response. However, I prevented her from speaking. I continued by telling her, "You have to live with the decision you made on your own. I have no problem with that." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. As if I were the bad guy, she really used the child, who was in her arms, to guilt-trip me. However, I wasn't buying into it. "I don't know that child," I informed her. "I'm not involved with him. You are not mine, and neither is he. That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I didn't wait for her to hit me again this time. In my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I left the door with the impression that I had finally prevailed. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know, it was pleasant. I felt a peculiar calmness come over me as soon as I shut the door behind her. I no longer felt sad, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the remorse, guilt, and incessant wondering that I had felt for her over the years simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, it was truly over. Naturally though, things didn't go as well as I had intended. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a decent individual. She had been of great assistance to me since her daughter left, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in," and that was my only response. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, had nothing to do with it. He had bailed out totally. She was left to figure things out on her own because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me and I nearly didn't respond. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and implied that perhaps I could be of some assistance. He was courteous but straightforward. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little, not aloud but you get the idea, when he began to explain that his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Her pals, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me the next thing I knew. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to realize at last that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life seemed calm and normal. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval, for once. I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. I occasionally encountered someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened with her?" I would shift the topic and respond in a succinct, courteous manner. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Every now and then, people I hardly spoke to would message me to say she was approaching everybody who would listen to seek for assistance. A few of them even implied that she hoped I might reconsider and decide to play father to her child after all. However, that was not going to occur. I had invested too much time and effort into regaining my life to ever consider taking that route once more. Simply because things didn't go as planned, I wasn't going to be her safety net or the person who picks up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions. And me? It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand theatrical sense, but quietly, contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient. I sincerely appreciate you staying until the very end. Please remember to like, share and subscribe if you truly enjoy our videos. Enjoy your wonderful day. My family sued me to give my house to my golden child brother. Later, they kidnapped my wife, claiming they were saving her from me. I've been harboring this grudge for years, and I'm not sure if I'm seeking guidance or if I simply need to vent. It's difficult to describe, but I suppose I've always known that my family didn't really love me, not in the manner that I should have. My brother, Ryan, is 17 years old and I'm the oldest sister, 24. 7 years is a great enough distance for us to never truly get along. To be honest, I believe that things began to go south as soon as he was born. I could tell as a child that he was the center of my parents' universe. I was just there, and he was their golden child. The more I think back on it, the more I see how messed up everything was. Even if I used to think maybe I was just being dramatic or hallucinating things. For instance, Ryan received a brand new PS5 with everything he could possibly want for Christmas last year. Me, I received socks. Walmart basic white socks, no joke. Even the socks themselves don't matter to me. I could live without them. The thing that bothers me though is that it was the only present I received. As Ryan devoured his presents like a ferocious animal, everyone was gathered around, grinning and laughing. The enthusiasm in the house was all for him. Then there was me, with a little packet of socks in my hand and a phony smile on my face as I was totally disregarded by everyone. What's crazy is that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was how my entire life was. My birthdays? Don't think about it. My family didn't even recognize my birthday until I was about 10 years old. They either forget or stop caring after that. My parents didn't even say happy birthday, so I celebrated my last birthday with college pals. Nothing. No text, no call. For Ryan's birthdays, however, they give it their best. My parents arranged a huge celebration for his 16th birthday last year. They hired a bouncy house, invited all of his friends and relatives, and even hired a magician or other entertainer. They had the entire event catered, and the house was decked out. Like the Super Bowl of birthdays, it was absurd. I wasn't even invited either. Yes, you read correctly. Even my own brother's birthday party did not extend an invitation to me. I only learned about it the day before, and when I brought it up to my parents, they dismissed it, claiming that I was too busy with school to want to attend. To be honest, I tried to forget the entire incident by going out with my friends that day, but even as we spent time together, I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I wasn't welcome in my own family. When my birthday arrived this year, it was the true kicker. Maybe, just maybe, they would at least recognize it, but I didn't anticipate anything. I've learned not to. Nothing. Once more, I spent the day with my college pals. Although it was enjoyable, the tiny celebration they organized for me in the dorms is not the same. Even if it's only a little, your family should enjoy your birthday with you. Every time Ryan turned 10, my parents transformed the house into a ludicrous pirate adventure theme complete with costumes and treasure hunts, reminding me of what I was missing. In the meantime, we enjoyed pizza for my 10th birthday. That was it. And I considered myself fortunate to receive that. The continual reminder that I'm not the favorite, that I never will be, is what hurts the most, not the presents or the parties. I've made a concerted effort to be a good son by doing all they asked of me, staying out of trouble, and getting good grades. However, none of that was important. Ryan has always been charming. He's gregarious, athletic, and everything I'm not. And my folks loved it. I recall being ecstatic to have a younger sibling when he was born. I assumed we would play video games together, be great friends, and hang around like the brothers in movies. However, I quickly discovered that Ryan also had no interest in me. He had all he could possibly want. His friends, his sports. I was merely present. I was the forgotten child, the fallback option. I became resentful of him as we grew older together. At first, I don't think it was his fault, but he began to recognize his authority. In the view of my parents, he could do no wrong. Guess who would be held accountable if we got into a fight? Me. Always me. My parents would simply laugh it off if he made a mistake, or they could even accuse me of not doing enough to assist him. I was always the villain, regardless of what he did. I recall Ryan lying about smashing the TV once. The TV was knocked off its stand as he and his friend were roughhousing. The object was all but broken. Ryan pointed directly at me when my parents got home and said I was the one who had knocked it over. Even if I wasn't at home, you know what? They took him seriously. They confiscated my phone, grounded me for a month, and pretended that I was a criminal. I basically gave up at that moment. In an attempt to escape from home, I began to isolate myself more and spent most of my time in my room or at friends' houses. However, each time I entered the house, it seemed like I was entering a never-ending reminder that I was unimportant. Ryan's room was filled with posters of his favorite sports teams and all the newest technology, whereas mine was tiny and claustrophobic. He seemed to have his own little empire, and I was just a nobody in the background. I will always remember my 18th birthday. I hoped that since I was growing up, they would do something special for me. However, no. It was just another day when I came downstairs that morning. Ryan was playing on his new Xbox, my dad was reading the paper, and my mom was working in the kitchen. No one spoke. Not even a happy birthday card or present. I seemed to be non-existent. I came to the realization that nothing would ever change at that point. Ryan had prevailed. He had stolen everything from me, including my parents' love and care. What's the worst? Most likely, he was unaware that he was doing it. Or perhaps he did, but he didn't give a damn. In any case, it wasn't just the typical sibling rivalry that made me loathe him. I'm referring to *hate*, the kind that keeps you up at night contemplating how much better your life would be without them. I realize it seems drastic, but that's my situation. Anger flares up inside of me every time I see Ryan's face. I no longer find it bearable to be in this family or to be near him. My parents always dismiss my attempts to express my feelings to them, claiming that I'm being theatrical or that I ought to treat Ryan with more consideration. However, why should I? When someone has taken everything from me, why should I be kind to them? I feel as though I'm caught in a never-ending circle of hatred and animosity, and the worst part is that I have no idea how to escape it. All I want is for myself to feel important and valuable. However, I will always be the second best in this family. From here, I have no idea where to go. Perhaps I should break things off with them. Perhaps I should go up to Ryan and tell him how much he has wounded me. Or perhaps I should just continue to separate myself from them and make an effort to live my life without them. I'm not sure. I just know that I can't continue to live this way. No more. My last post was a few years ago, and to be honest, I never imagined that I would return. I believed that the family trouble was behind me forever. However, the nightmare I thought I had escaped has suddenly become worse than I could have ever imagined, since life has a tendency of throwing curveballs. This is a lengthy and convoluted narrative, so buckle up. I took the necessary action after my last post. I cut off contact with my parents. How could I not? I was being tormented by the ongoing disregard and the obvious partiality shown to my younger brother Ryan. I decided to avoid making too much touch. As quickly as possible, I left my parents' house and moved in with a few college pals. To be honest, I felt as though a burden had been removed. Of course though, I still had to earn a living. Since I've always been skilled in graphic design, I began working as a freelancer on Fiverr. Initially, it was only to cover the expenses, but as I gained more customers and established a reputation, it grew into something more. I put in a lot of work, whether it was on the weekends or late at night. I refused to let my achievement be defined by how my family treated me. Then I met her, Megan, and it was incredible. She was intelligent, ambitious, and kind, everything I could have hoped for in a spouse. We clicked right away because she worked as a freelancer managing social media for small businesses. We began working together on projects, supporting one another's professional development. She was the first person, to be honest, who gave me the feeling that I wasn't invisible. She did see me, you know. And since she truly cared about me, She loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for her or out of duty. Our dreams grew as our jobs flourished. After a year or so of dating, we moved in together, and things continued to improve. Our crazy plan was to combine our savings and purchase a home. But we didn't want just any house, we wanted something unique. We searched for months before locating the ideal location, a huge 3-story suburban home. Our combined income allowed us to make it work, even though it was more than we ever imagined we could afford. We were overjoyed. This was something we created together, our dream. 3 days after we completed the transaction, we were formally homeowners. The real nightmare began at that point. My mother called me 3 days after we moved in. I wasn't even willing to pick up at first. Since I moved out, we hadn't spoken much, and the few times we had spoken, it had either been awkward or resulted in a fight. However, I responded for some reason. As if nothing had happened, she chirped, "Hey honey, we're in town and thought we'd stop by to see the new house." I ought to have been more aware. I should have sensed that something wasn't right. I told her they could come over though, even though I should have known better. I reasoned that it would be better to end the visit than to continue avoiding them. My dad, Ryan, and a woman I had never met before arrived at our front door a few hours later. This is where things start to become extremely strange. My younger brother Ryan, the beloved and golden child, wasn't by himself. The female companion? It turns out that was Karen, his fiancée. She was also expecting a child. Yes, you read correctly. Ryan would soon become a father. Nobody had bothered to inform me of my brother's engagement or the impending birth of a child. My first warning sign was that my father began using passive-aggressive language before he had even entered. "Whoa, you bought this house. Surprised you could afford something like this," he replied sarcastically, as if he had been demeaning me all along. However, I dismissed it. I didn't want to get into an argument. Not quite yet. The discomfort increased after they were inside. Megan sensed that something was wrong when my mom tried to strike up a conversation with her. She kept looking at me as if to ask, "What's going on?" At the same time, Karen was pacing the house as if she owned it, while my dad and Ryan were whispering to each other. Then suddenly, my father revealed shocking information. As patronizing as ever, he began, "We've been thinking. It would make sense for Ryan and Karen to move in here since they are starting a family and will need space for the baby." Not quite digesting what he had just said, I just gazed at him. "What? This house is much too large for you and Megan alone," my father went on, utterly disregarding my surprise. "A location like this would be very beneficial for Ryan and Karen as they raise their child. You don't need all this space." What I was hearing was unbelievable. I felt as though my own house was being gaslit. "Are you kidding me?" After giving me a direct look, my dad said something that made my blood boil. "No, we're serious. It's time for you to let your brother have what he needs and move aside. After all, he is establishing his own family and family comes first. You can find a smaller space with Megan. This house will work better for them." I went crazy. All of the years of animosity, disregard, and partiality suddenly surfaced. "Are you for real now? This home belongs to us. This place is in our names. Megan and I purchased it. Ryan knocked someone up, so you can't simply walk in here and declare he should have it." Ryan, appearing smug, tried to add something. "Dude, you don't really need all this room. Come on, we are parents, you are not." I yelled, "That's not the point. The idea is that just because you believe you have a right to something doesn't mean you can just take it. I'm tired of being ignored for you, even though I've done it my entire life." My dad became really combative at that point. In an attempt to frighten me, he stood up and puffed out his chest. "Watch what you say, boy. You should be appreciative that we're asking rather than merely telling you to give up the keys. Whether you like it or not, Ryan will own this house." I became enraged. I'm not sure what got to me, but I lost it. I shoved him back into the wall as I pounced at him. "Please leave my house immediately." I let out a yell. I was unable to stop Megan from yelling at us to stop. Anger that had been bottled up for years was erupting. After my dad pushed me back, we got into a full-on brawl, hurling punches and cursing at one another. Karen stood in the corner, frantically calling her phone while my mom and Ryan screamed. We didn't ultimately stop until the police arrived. I suppose that when things got out of control, Karen had phoned them. They took my dad and I apart, put us in handcuffs, and dragged us to the station. It was unbelievable to me that this was my reality as I sat in the holding cell. I was sitting in jail because my own father had attempted to take my house for my brother. A few hours later, Megan came to my rescue, but the damage was already done. My family was officially irreparably damaged. However, it didn't stop there. It grew worse, oh dear. In his unending brilliance, my father chose to sue me for the house. In fact, he attempted to sue me, saying that Ryan and Karen were more in need of the house than I was and that I ought to give it to them. I was stunned by its blatant insolence. Thus, we appeared in court. I prepared for the battle of my life by hiring a lawyer and gathering all the required paperwork to prove that the house was in my name. The truth is, though, I had something different planned. I wasn't going to overlook the trail that years of emotional and psychological abuse had left behind. I collected information from acquaintances who had witnessed my parents' treatment of me over the years, including emails, texts, and even eyewitness accounts. I took everything to court. In addition to asserting that the house belonged to me, my attorney claimed that I had spent the majority of my youth being neglected and emotionally abused. I had had enough of being the submissive, quiet son. It was time to defend ourselves. Months passed throughout the court case. My dad did everything he could to paint me as the villain. He portrayed himself as a devoted father who only wanted to act in his family's best interests. Ryan and Karen pretended to be the victims, saying that I was being self-centered for keeping the house and that they needed it for their child. However, none of it was successful. I felt as though a burden had been removed from my chest as the final verdict was rendered. In addition to finding in my favor, the judge mandated that my father compensate me for emotional and psychological abuse by awarding me $120,000. It was unbelievable to me. It felt like justice that someone had finally defended me for the first time in my life. I stopped communicating with Ryan and my parents following the court decision. The lies, the manipulation, and the unrelenting favoritism were all too much for me to handle. Having the house to ourselves at last allowed Megan and I to begin rebuilding our lives. However, the wounds caused by everything that transpired will never completely heal. I still find it hard to comprehend how far my parents went to defraud me, even as I write this. Ryan was the golden child, and I was merely an afterthought. But I suppose that's simply the way things have always been. However, it is no longer the case. About 3 years have passed since my previous update, and I wish I could tell that everything has been going well. I believe that everything had finally calmed down after the chaos caused by my dad attempting to take my house. I believed that I had permanently moved on from the family drama. If I've learned anything, it's that no matter how hard I try to keep my distance from my family, they will always want to pull me back into their toxic mess. Before I get into the recent horror, let me just provide some context. Megan and I were married 3 years ago. I can honestly say that it was the best choice I've ever made, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. After the litigation with my dad, I realized that Megan was the only person I could really rely on because she supported me through all the chaos with my family. Only a few of Megan's family members and close friends attended our tiny, private wedding. My brother, parents, and other family members were not invited. I didn't see the point after everything they had done to me, including the abuse, deception, and litigation. I owed them nothing, and I wasn't going to let their toxic conduct to spoil my wedding day. They discovered it, of course. I don't know how, but a few days after the wedding, my mom sent me a lengthy, guilt-tripping email expressing how disappointed they were not invited. I was okay with my dad not bothering to get in touch. However, it was my younger brother, Ryan, who lost it. I suppose I should have anticipated it. My parents had always gone out of their way to satisfy Ryan, who was known as the golden child. He never accepted accountability for anything in his life, and he always placed the blame for his errors on someone else. The financial status of my parents suffered when the court decided in my favor and mandated that my dad pay me $120,000. They weren't in financial distress or anything, but their standard of living had decreased. Being the pampered brat that he is, Ryan was unable to cope. I suppose that was the beginning of the end for him because he didn't get the house he believed he was entitled to and his father had to pay a hefty sum of money. A few months after the court case, his fiancée, Karen, broke up with him. She took the kid and returned to living with her parents, based on rumors I heard. Although I never heard the whole story, I'm positive that Ryan's inability to cope with the strain was the reason. I can help with it. He believed that I was to blame for everything, including my dad's legal defeat, their financial difficulties, and Karen's departure from him. Things took a very bad turn at that point. About a month has passed since my wedding. As we continued to adjust to our new life together, Megan and I were relishing the tranquility that came with finally escaping the toxic hold of my family. I made the decision to take a stroll around the neighborhood one afternoon. Sometimes I like to take a stroll around the peaceful streets and breathe in the fresh air to decompress. At least it should have been a typical day. I spotted Ryan halfway down the block. He was standing on the street corner, looking at me with a look of unadulterated anger in his eyes. Uncertain if I was seeing things, I froze for a moment. I didn't know why he was in my area, and we hadn't spoken in years. Ryan. Confused, I called out. What the hell are you doing here? He charged at me before I could even comprehend what was happening. He was also not without anything. He was holding an iron rod that looked like it had been torn off a building site. What the, Ryan? I yelled, attempting to retreat, but he moved too quickly. With all of his strength, he swung the rod, and before I could react, it struck my side. Instantaneous, the pain shot through my ribs like a flame. Gasping for air, I sat down, but Ryan wasn't finished. He lowered the rod once more, aiming for my legs this time. When it struck my left shin, I heard the horrible snap and fell hard, landing on the sidewalk. You ruined my life. Ryan's voice cracked with rage as he screamed. You are solely to blame. Everything is ruined because of you, including the fact that Dad went bankrupt and Karen left me. To protect myself, I attempted to stand up, but my body refused to obey. Every nerve in my body felt like it was on fire from the excruciating pain. Ryan raised the iron rod once more as he stood over me, his face contorted in rage. Knowing what was going to happen, I prepared myself, but I was immobile. I had no power at all. My right arm took the following blow, and I felt the force cause my bone to break. Time seemed to slow down. The world around me grew hazy and muffled, like if I were underwater, and my vision went blurry. I lay there waiting for the next strike, wondering if this was how it was going to end, unable to even scream. I'm not sure how long the attack went on, but eventually I heard voices, far away at first, then getting louder. I could hear footsteps running toward me and shouting. I was too far gone to comprehend what was happening when I saw someone take Ryan and pull him away from me. I lost consciousness. I was in the hospital when I woke up. Megan was seated by my bedside, her eyes puffy and red from sobbing, her face pallid. My throat was dry and every muscle in my body ached as I tried to speak. Megan squeezed my hand and said, "You're okay. You'll be all right." However, I wasn't feeling well. My right arm, left leg and ribs were all fractured. I was fortunate to be alive, the doctor stated. Ryan might have murdered me if the spectators hadn't stepped in at the right moment. To stop him, the police had to be called. As I lay bleeding on the sidewalk, Ryan was immediately hauled into custody and placed in handcuffs. The next few days were a haze. As my body gradually started to mend, the painkillers kept me sedated and I was in and out of consciousness. Megan refused to leave my side and remained by my side the whole time. She took care of everything, including hiring a lawyer to handle the impending court case, handling the insurance, and handling the police reports. Because a trial was indeed imminent. Ryan was facing severe jail time due to the severity of my injuries after being charged with assault with a deadly weapon. Megan gave me the specifics when I was at last clear enough to comprehend what was going on. Since Karen had left him, Ryan had gone absolutely insane. He fell into a severe despair, yet he blamed me for his shortcomings rather than owning up to his own shortcomings. The police report states that Ryan admitted to them that he had been plotting the attack for hours while waiting outside my residence. He brought the iron rod he had stolen from a building site close to his flat. The worst part though. He had absolutely no regrets about it. He told the police that I had destroyed his life, that he deserved to punish me and that he was only receiving justice for my actions. He genuinely thought that I was to blame for everything, including our dad's financial difficulties and his fiance's departure. I was in the hospital for weeks to heal from the fractures. Physical rehabilitation, innumerable testing, and the impending court case were all new forms of agony every day. I was unable to walk for about a month, and even after I was released from the hospital, I spent weeks on crutches and wearing a cast on my arm. According to the physicians, I might not fully recover my left leg's mobility for months, and even then, it might never return. A few months later, the trial got underway. Naturally, Ryan entered a not guilty plea. He believed that I was the one who drove him over the line, and that his actions were justifiable. His attorney attempted to claim that he was in the wrong frame of mind due to all that had transpired with our family and that he had acted out of emotional anguish. However, the proof was incriminating. Several others who saw Ryan assaulting me were eyewitnesses, and they stepped in and contacted the police. The police report unequivocally demonstrated that Ryan had premeditated the attack, and the prosecution had medical papers outlining my injuries. There was no doubt that he had come to my house with the intention of hurting me. One of the most difficult things I have ever had to do is sit in that courtroom and watch my brother attempt to defend what he did to me. Throughout the trial, he didn't even glance at me. It seemed as though he no longer recognized me. The worst part though, it was my parents, not me, who came to support him. Asterisk. They nodded as if they agreed with every word he said while they sat on his side of the courtroom and listened to him spew lies about how I had ruined his life. It felt like being stabbed in the stomach. They still selected him despite everything they had done to me and everything he had done to me. They continued to think that he was the victim in this whole situation. The decision was obvious from the beginning of the trial, which lasted for a few weeks. Ryan received a 5-year prison sentence after being convicted guilty of aggravated assault. After 3, he will be eligible for parole, but to be honest, I don't give a damn anymore. I've come to terms with the idea that I no longer have a family. Not a biological one anyhow. Throughout everything, Megan has been my pillar of support. She is the one person who has supported me through difficult times without faltering. Moving on and achieving both physical and mental healing have been our main priorities. I've been attending therapy in an attempt to handle the trauma of what transpired, but it's taking a while. I feel like I'm finally making progress on certain days, although other days are better than others. On other days, I feel like a shattered, empty replica of the person I used to be, and I can't even look in the mirror. I will never allow my family to harm me again, though. I'm finished with them altogether. Thank you for reading if you have gotten this far. For now, I'm just attempting to live each day as it comes, without knowing what the future will bring. Although there will never be a perfect life, at least I now know who I can trust, and that is more valuable than any family could ever be. My parents perpetrated the most outrageous prank yet, right when I thought I had heard the last of them. About 6 months had passed since Ryan's sentencing. At last, things were beginning to return to normal for Megan and me. We were even discussing creating a family of our own, the nightmares had subsided, and I was improving in therapy. Until last week, things were gradually improving. I was to have lunch with Megan at a cafe close to her workplace. We did it frequently as a way to spend time together and break up the workday. However, she failed to appear that day. I waited at first, thinking perhaps she was simply running late. I called her phone and texted her, but to no avail. My heart began to race. Even if she's only saying she's stopped in traffic, Megan always responds and is never late. A feeling of icy fear crept over me, as if something terrible had happened. When I called her office, they informed me that she had left on schedule. Panic struck. I started driving around the neighborhood since I had no idea what to do and thought maybe she had been in an accident or her phone had died. I received a call from a blocked number at that point. I initially believed it to be a hoax, but I felt compelled to respond. The next thing I heard chilled my blood, therefore I'm glad I did. My mother's voice, which was simultaneously chilly and sickly sweet, said over the phone, "Your wife is with us. We're taking her to a safe place where you can't harm her anymore." My heart stopped beating. "What the?" I yelled, nearly causing the car to crash. "What on earth are you discussing? Where is Megan? What did you do?" My dad's voice interrupted. "She's with us now. You have twisted her against her family and poisoned her mind. We're acting in her best interests. We're bringing her away from you to a place where she can think rationally." What I was hearing was unbelievable. My wife had been abducted by my own parents. In their perverted story, they honestly thought I was a villain, and now they were stealing Megan, my true love, in the hopes of rescuing her from me. I told them, "I swear to God, I'm calling the police if you don't bring her back right now." I'm not sure how I was able to remain composed. My father genuinely chuckled. "Do you believe that we fear the police? You are not her family. We are. She would prefer not to have you around." Never in my life had I been so blindly angry. I quickly contacted the police after hanging up. I was going crazy while I waited for them to track down the call. I kept thinking about what they were doing to her and where they may take her. It seemed like an eternity as the hours went by. At long last the police called me. Megan had been located. She had been brought to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of town by my parents. They were trying to deprogram her by keeping her isolated in a room and telling her to leave me and return to the family. Being the fierce woman that she is, Megan had already escaped the room and fled to the lobby of the motel, where she pleaded with the clerk to call the police. She was safe when the police arrived, and my parents were immediately taken into custody. They face many charges, including wrongful imprisonment and kidnapping. I genuinely don't care what will happen to them now, but I don't know. Personally, I don't think they're alive. It doesn't matter what false beliefs they may have had or what excuse they may have given themselves for their behavior. I will never forgive them for attempting to take away the one person who is extremely important to me. The only thing that matters is that Megan is safe now. However, I will always remember my mother's voice when she stated that they were acting for her own good. They seemed to be living in another reality where I was the antagonist and they were the heroes. I have no idea what the future will bring, But I know that I will never again be with them. It's time to at last, genuinely move on.